This is the Rother Planning Committee of Thursday, the 11th of November, and I'm going to start with item 1 on the agenda, which are the minutes. Could I have authorization to sign the minutes from the previous meeting?
So moved.
Thank you very much. Julie, could I have apologies for absences and substitutes?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Johnson, and Councillor John Barnes is standing in as substitute today.
Thank you. Any additional items on the agenda?
No, there's none.
Any withdrawn applications?
No, there's none.
Could we have disclosures of interest, please? Councillor Mayor.
2 declarations, Chair. Item number 9, the Globe. I declare a personal interest in that my partner's son, Timothy Dickinson, lives at number 55 Military Road and has signed a petition against this development.
Thank you very much. Any
and
other?
Also, sorry. And the second one, item number 11, Mistral. I declare a personal interest, a pecuniary interest in that it's my house.
Thank you very much. And you'll be leaving the meeting for that application. All right. Thank you very much. On that note, we will move forward. If anyone does think they have a disclosure of interest as an item comes up, just please say so before we start. So the application index is there and can be seen. And we're going to move on to the first application, which is RR 2021/1483/P. This is Beeching Road, Unit 7 to 12, and I'm going to hand over to our development manager. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just give me a while to share the screen. Very shortly. Thank you very much. This is a creation of one opening for an installation of an external door on the right-hand side elevation of Unit 7, and the creation of one opening for installation on an external door on the left-hand side elevation of Unit 12 at Beeching Road, Unit 7, 12, Bexhill. As you can see from the site location plan, the site premises consists of a single building oriented at right angles to the highway, containing 6 small industrial units, all of which front an access road that runs off Beeching Road. The site is located within the development boundary for Bexhill, as outlined in the adopted development and site allocations and site plan, and site allocations local plan. There was a previous permission for the refurbishment of 6 units, alterations to elevations to provide roller shutter doors, photovoltaic panels at roof level, replacement of roof coverings and demolition of rear extensions. This was approved in 2019. There's a non-material amendment to this planning permission approved in September 2020. There'll be no representations, and the Town Council raises no objection to the application. The issues here are the impacts of the development on the character and appearance of the area and the impacts on highways. Go through the plans. See here, proposed right-hand side elevation and left-hand side elevation and the ground floor plans. These are minor works relating to the existing. New access doors are similar to existing doors on the other units. And so will not be out of place or visually intrusive, set in accordance with policies EN3 of the core strategy of the 9, the ASA local plan. Secondly, as part of this application, the firm proposes to install a new access path, which would cut off an existing tarmac path and provide access to a new constructed door. Not considered that the formation of this new access path would give rise to any adverse impacts. Pedestrians or cyclists due to position and sighting along an existing path. The recommendation is therefore for approval subject to standard conditions in relation to time, development of also approved plans, and matching material.
This is a straightforward application which has come to us because it is a Rother application. Does anyone have any questions or discussion? Councillor Pritchard.
I just wanted to say that we visited the site. As you say, there are no issues with this, and I move approval.
Councillor Ganley.
I second approval.
Could we take a vote on that, please? Julie? Those in favour? Anyone against? No abstentions? Thank you. The second item on the agenda is RR 2021/863/P, which is 55 South Cliff, and this has been an item which is called in by Councillor Earl Williams, who cannot be with us today. Over to Miles, the Development Manager.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Let's say this is a replacement of an existing building with a new dwelling. If I look at the site location plan, it's a 1950s chalet bungalow on the south side of South Cliff on the coastal side. The property occupies land that slopes down from east to west. It also slopes steeply down towards the south and meets a promenade on its southern boundary. The cliff itself, which is in Cruden Cliff Sites of Nature Conservation Importance, lies just outside of the area. To the west of the site is number 57 South Cliff, which consists of a very similar style dwelling. The application. Very recently, the council permitted the demolition and replacement of this neighbouring bungalow. The replacement scheme involved bringing the footprint of this new dwelling forwards towards the road to be in line with number 55 South Cliff, which is the application site, rather than the twin chalet bungalow at number 59. It also involved excavation to accommodate a lower ground floor level to house a swimming pool, and to create a new landscape garden to the rear, leading to the existing concrete sun terrace. The site lies within a mixed residential area, which includes houses and bungalows of various sizes and designs. A number of other sites have been redeveloped or dwellings extended. Demolition of the existing two-storey dwelling, constructed of red brick basins with dormers and tiled pitched roof and additional single-storey extensions to the street elevation, build a replacement with a modern-style dwelling on 3 levels. The proposal includes excavation works to accommodate a lower ground floor level to house a swimming pool. Modern flat roof design with a number of small Velux windows and an array of solar panels. There's an off-street parking area to accommodate 2 to 3 vehicles. 4 bedrooms and balcony areas are proposed to the rear. Majority of windows are proposed to the rear south-facing elevation with limited windows to the side elevation. See the site plan here, and you can see the elevations, and these compare with the existing elevations, which are in a plan up on the screen. They're the proposed. Proposed external materials consist of a mixture of white brick, natural timber, and concrete. The roof materials propose seed and planted roof with zinc parapet capping with a single ply membrane roof with gravel and solar panels with a zinc parapet capping. The windows and doors propose the use of timber, an aluminium composite window, and doors.
So, Councillor Ganley.
Chairman, I'm just wondering why PM is reading this out. We've got it in front of us. We already know what you're telling us. So I'm wondering why you feel it necessary to repeat what's printed on the paper.
Well, Councillor Ganley is running through the key elements of the application.
But it's just reading what's there.
No, I'm not. It's not reading just what's there. I'm running through the key aspects. It is part of a presentation.
Beg your pardon.
Okay, thank you. Just the planning history, there's nothing relevant for the particular site, but there is a permission for demolition of existing dwelling, resizing of the building footprint, excavation to construct a 4-storey dwelling at number 57 South Cliff, and number 59, a very similar type of application where an existing bungalow was demolished and replaced with a 3-storey family dwelling. The first one was approved in 2020 and the latter in 2021. There were no comments from the Town Council. There were 21 letters of objection that have been received from the public. The primary concerns raised are summarised as follows. The design is incongruous. It will lead to a loss of privacy and amenity to neighbouring gardens, especially with the balcony. It's overdevelopment for the size of the plot. The lack of a ground inspection report, which number 59, it was required for number 59, so it should be for this application too. The excavation of cliff structural damage, water seepage, unstable conditions, and disruption due to 2 letters of support for the improvement of a tired, outdated design, variety of development in the area, and the improvement of the existing bungalow. In terms of the main issues, firstly, is effects of the proposal on the character and appearance of the area, the effects of the proposal on the living conditions of adjoining occupants, and the effect of the proposal on the stability of the cliff and adjoining properties. Given the mix of dwellings in the surrounding area, which includes recently constructed contemporary style dwellings, the design of the proposed dwellings is considered to complement the replacement dwelling at number 57, and on balance is considered acceptable. It is conceded that mutual overlooking already exists between adjoining properties. The majority of windows would be at a very rear elevation into the front elevation. A balcony is proposed at the first floor level to allow views out over the sea. Some oblique overlooking of neighbouring properties and the rear gardens will amount from this. However, the eastern elevation of the balcony is solid brick, obscuring any views of the neighbouring garden. The western elevation is a small area of glass screening, which is supposed to be constructed to be an obscured privacy screen, which again reduces any overlooking. The application commissioned a site investigation report. This report, written by Southern Testing, concluded that the proposal would have negligible impact on the sea, and that the basement proposal would not exert any additional pressure to the cliff base, therefore not have any detrimental effect on the overall stability of the cliff. Based on the submitted reports and the fact that the safe construction of the development is for the developer, the proposal is deemed acceptable in this regard. So the recommendation is to approve, subject to conditions. These conditions are standard conditions regarding time, the accordance of plans, preoccupation conditions to implement agreed boundary treatments, a preoccupation condition to erect privacy screens for the balconies, 2 conditions related to dechlorination, and the need to get a consent order from Environment Agency for swimming pool, and details to be submitted for foul drainage backwash from the swimming pool. Pre-commencement, a land stability report submitted for approval needs to be carried out in accordance with said approved report. There's a standard condition regarding water efficiency, a standard condition regarding Part M4 accessibility, construction of the dwelling, and the pre-above slab level condition, that is with any above ground works. Details of hard and soft landscape should be submitted for approval, carried out in accordance with the approved plan. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Miles. We do have a gentleman speaking against the applicant, and that's Mr. Bill Morey. Are you here? You could come forward to the speaker's chair. So you have just 5 minutes, and if members wish to ask questions afterwards, they can. I'm going to turn my microphone off. You need to turn yours on, which is by pushing the button.
Good morning. Those of us who live in and around Southcliffe fundamentally disagree with the recommendation for approval. I think you visited the site on Tuesday and will have been reminded of the concerns previously expressed in committee over the stability of the cliff at the more modest number 59 approved at the last committee meeting, or I think in September. That noted the requirement for extensive civil engineering detailed in a 109-page ground investigation report. And this far more extensive proposal is considered to be acceptable on the basis of a 2-page letter commissioned by the applicant. The report correctly concludes that the key issue is the effect of the proposal on the character and appearance of the area, the living conditions of the adjoining occupants. Yet it relies solely on the precedent set by your approval for a replacement house at number 57, currently unbuilt, without properly considering the street scene character of the area or the impact on neighbouring houses. To say that there's no single unifying character in the area is patently untrue. In all directions, the environment is defined by dwellings built in a traditional style, with traditional materials and with traditional pitched tiled roofs. Recently approved developments and replacements reflect this. They have pitched roofs and even Bexhill brick is specified. This proposal is not of a similar design as has been reported to you, but relies on a design of materials that are completely out of keeping. There is no consistency of planning approach here. The report claims that the proposal retains important gaps between adjoining properties. This is misleading and incorrect. The existing building has a gap of 8.5 metres between it and number 53 at first floor level to allow the wind through. But this is reduced by 5 metres, and by the rectangular first floor, this important gap will all but disappear. On the question of the living conditions of adjoining occupants, yet more omissions and inaccuracies in the officer report, I'm afraid. Fewer than 7 letters of objection refer to overshadowing of neighbouring buildings, and 4 specifically refer to the overshadowing and loss of light caused by the extended east elevation being a mere 1 metre from the boundary with number 53. These are material considerations and are not examined in the report's summary of objections. The excessive bulk and poor design have a negative impact on number 53. It's overbearing and causes a loss of light and outlook. It's neither neighbourly or acceptable to build 30 square metres of blank wall, 8 or 9 metres, the height of this chamber pretty much, 1 metre from the boundary with number 53. This 2-storey wall extends 4 metres beyond the current building line to the rear of the buildings, and looms over the rear of 53 with resulting loss of light. The report also asserts that the ground floor terrace would be at existing ground level and so would not be harmful in overlooking. Again, this is misleading, and this was also in the what's just been read to us. Misleading as the plans show basement courtyard garden, but with a 40 square metre terrace or entertainment space above the swimming pool, which is 1 metre higher than the level of the existing lawn, with obvious potential for overlooking for number 53. All these negative issues are contrary to your policy, OSS 4, which specifically seeks to protect, and I quote, the amenities of adjoining properties. Of the 29 policies listed as relevant at the start of the report, OSS 4 is the only one specifically referred to with reference to both character and appearance and living conditions. And again, clearly confirms it as a key issue in this matter. Of course, dwellings do need to be replaced over time for a variety of reasons. However, when doing so, a balance needs to be struck between size and design and the protection of the local environment, including residential amenities. And I think at this stage, sustainability and climate change are very, very important here. This proposal fails to reflect local design and character. It's overbearing and does nothing to counter climate change. I would ask you to please refuse this particular application, but to invite the applicant to come back with a more balanced and sympathetic scheme which can be supported. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone that would like to ask Mr. Mori any questions? Yes, Councillor.
Yes, I think you referred to the cliff stability issue, and I assure you I take that very seriously. I come from a village with significant cliff erosion and landslip problems. But do you think that can be adequately dealt with via the condition which the officers have suggested?
Councillor Mayor, that is not a question for the speaker. That is a technical question for the development manager. No, it's not appropriate. I'm afraid it's not appropriate that you do. It's a technical question for the officer. You can ask the development manager in a few minutes. Is there another question on this side? Another question? I'm sure that question will be asked and answered. Thank you very much. Very much appreciate you speaking. Thank you. Good. So, would you like to ask your question, Andrew?
Well, yes. Obviously, you have proposed a condition as to, it doesn't use the word geotechnical report, but that's what it is. That would seem to me to be an acceptable way forward, subject to all the other things the speaker has raised and the objectors have raised. But I would just like to emphasize that I would, if this were to be granted, I would very much hope that officers would look with a fine-tooth comb over any report submitted and to have it independently verified to ensure that that this cliff really will be stable.
I think we note that, and I think my sort of view, we think the condition is sufficient in terms of whether we can verify that's something that perhaps at a later time.
Councillor Barnes.
I think, Chairman, I would like put it in the form really of a general question. Looking at the area, there are very many varied types of houses, but I wonder how many have this particular roof form. Could the officer enlighten us?
Well, having had a look around the area, I do see a great variety of shapes, sizes, and styles. Whether there's actually this particular roof form, I can't say, because one would have to say how far would one look around the but the thing is that the variety of styles is in our opinion that you're looking at the merits of the application, the variety of the styles in the area, and the quality of design, notwithstanding impacts on residential. This is what makes this.
I guess the purpose of the site visit was to assess that, to see what it looked like in perspective of the rest of the dwellings around. Have any other questions, Councillor Lane?
Yes, going back to the site visit, as we couldn't gain entry, I was just a little concerned with the southern boundary because I wasn't absolutely sure what was the southern boundary to that property or potential property. And if it is the sort of fortress style brick bit at the back there, then I think we need to perhaps say a little more about that boundary and its retention rather than just the vegetation, because clearly that is quite a substantial support to that bit of the cliff. And if it's possible that that is removed, it could be quite significant, I would. But that does concern me a bit.
What did you have in mind?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's no mention of the fact that should stay. And could it possibly be taken down if it doesn't suit? It certainly wouldn't marry up very nicely with a grand modern design property. So I can see it possibly disappearing because we've only talked about retaining vegetation. So I'm just a little bit concerned that what is the boundary and what does it look like and what should we be retaining? That's my...
Right, the boundary is what the red line shows. The red line shows it extending down to past that fortress. Typical with a lot of the other houses, on one side, there's seems to be a slightly shorter one boundary for the other properties. But let me see if I can get it on the screen. Yeah, if you look at, I think,
Technical issue, just one moment.
right, okay. Yeah. Put it on the beds. Let's have a look. Sorry for the delay. What we have here is, you can see the site plan. The red line boundary is the development boundary. And this is the existing plan as existing. If I can see that, see it in slightly more detail. As we go a little further, you can see there where it is. There. The thing is, regards to the land stability issue, it's that condition, that I think it's condition number 7, that requires a report to be submitted for approval and implementation of that approved report and findings and recommendations. So if you're looking at what's actually extended, you can see it's the house and it's full, it's not there, and the impact on the land stability report with assessors.
I think the question Councillor Langlands had was to do with the final retaining wall before the course.
Well, the proposal doesn't affect that. But I'm saying the mitigating condition is that we would look at that with the report about the actual development itself. So it's not impacted. Thanks. Sorry,
Yeah, I mean, just to come back on that, I think incredibly relevant part of the stability. I mean, we've got several houses along there now that have got basements, and there have never been basements along that cliff edge. And quite a lot of excavation has gone on in a small area. So my concern is that I absolutely take on board the geotech report will give us the details that we need. But we are not really truly going to know the impact of those basements and running around swimming pools and lots of concrete blocking water drainage. And I just feel that I want to make sure that if there is that big, well, you saw it, it's an incredibly large brick retaining wall. If that does go, that would be quite detrimental to that part of the cliff face. And I just think it should have been mentioned. I mean, can I ask if the officer did a site visit?
well, I mean,
Right. It's just not mentioned, which.
I think the point here is that what's in front of you, and that's what we're looking at. It's not whether something might happen in the future. It's what's in front of you, what conditions would mitigate any potential adverse impacts and make the development acceptable. And that is the limit to what we can consider.
But I think we need the condition there, because that wall was in front of me.
There is a condition.
Yeah, but to retain that.
Retain the wall.
Yeah.
Retain the existing wall.
Yes, not just the vegetation.
It's not anything. So the current application doesn't do that wall. You'd like a condition to ensure it is retained.
We can't attach.
If I heard correctly, the land slopes from east to west. And what concerns me a little bit, I've seen this before recently, close to where I live, is that when we're talking about the patio near the pool, if it's measured on their own ground level at the build, that's one thing. But if the land is elevated, that's going to tower above their house on the left if you're looking at it from the seafront. So everything that you build, if you consider the measurements from the land level of the building, that's one thing. But if the land is elevated, which is that it's sloping from the east, then the neighbour on the left, as I say, looking from the sea, will be greatly overlooked, if I've understood correctly.
Well, I think my understanding is that with all these things, is a judgment call what the proposed development is and how it might impact in terms of overlooking what the development might itself result in. It's there still as well. I think it has been acknowledged in the report there is a certain amount of overlooking, as there would be in a residential area. But on balance, the judgment is that it's acceptable, and conditions have been in place for the balcony as well in terms of
Thank you. I think it's a little bit challenging, like Councillor Langland says, because we did go to the beach naturally and look at one angle, and the occupants weren't in, but without being able to get into the garden around the back, it's hard to figure out how it would directly affect each neighbour. There are a lot of houses like that in the area in all shapes and sizes, but it's hard to judge how it would impact a neighbour without actually standing where the new home would be. Would it be possible to have another site visit, or would that really throw a spanner in the works?
Well, if you deferred it, you could defer it and go back again. I think you probably have to consider if it was deferred, the applicant might treat it as undetermined. And I think you have to really keep in mind the next door neighbour has already had approval for something which is comparable. They're the issues that you really need to think about.
I think for me, the stability of the cliff is the crucial issue. I'm not so concerned about the basement, but I'm very concerned about the swimming pool and the tremendous weight of water in that swimming pool. I have had experience of swimming pools of a similar size, and they are a colossal burden on retaining walls. Very concerned about that.
I think we had Councillor Mears, then Councillor Barnes.
I think Mr. Joyce may already have covered the point I was going to raise, which was to do with the retaining wall. If that's not part of the present application, so that if the householder wished to do any work to that retaining wall, to change it, to alter it, that would require a fresh application.
Yes, it would. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, let me begin with the cliff. As I suspect the officers already know, I think that cliff needs to be built into the local plan, because that affects the general appearance from the beach, and is part really of the entire of the area. And so I think further changes to retaining walls and to the plant life of that cliff do need actually to be handled as general policy. And I agree with what our officers said. There's no proposal to change that at the moment. But I have to say, in future, I would like to see native planting rather than pampas grass. That cliff, totally out of keeping with the area. I'm also satisfied, I must say, with the pre-commencement condition, so long as it does cover the effect of the swimming pool. Because like Councillor Norton, I'm worried about the swimming pool and the weight and the possible impact on the stability of the cliff. So I think that point needs to be covered very specifically in any pre-commencement condition. I have to say, I'm uneasy about the impact on the neighbours because we weren't able to gain access to the site. And I do think there is a case for deferral. I certainly don't think I feel inclined to refuse at the moment. But I have to say, the levels there, in particular levels of the raised terrace, do raise concerns about the possible impact on neighbours, which I don't think were fully visible to us, either in the narrative that we have in front of us, or indeed on our site visit. And I think that, therefore, I'm slightly inclined to ask you, Chairman, whether there oughtn't to be a brief deferral where we can have an arranged site visit to look at that specific point. The final point I want to make, and it is an interesting one, and I haven't made my mind up yet. There are varied designs around that area. There's no overall standard design. But I only remember seeing one similar design. And you do wonder whether this is the absence really of a more traditional roof form does put it slightly out of keeping with the area of South Cliff generally. And I am talking very specifically about the narrow area of South Cliff. As I say, it's a tricky one. I don't feel inclined to vote for refusal, but I am inclined to argue for deferral while we look at the impact on the neighbours more specifically.
Well, you can choose to put whatever proposal forward you like, really. I think I'm not sure how much we would have seen viewing it, because you're talking about the relativity to the other buildings, and what you don't have is the one next door which hasn't been built yet. I think that's the key. If anything, a side-by-side plan showing how their roofs align. But there are very different roofs already on some of those redeveloped plots. Councillor Barnes.
Chairman, could I just follow up? Because it would be helpful, frankly, and again, this is another reason why one might want to defer, to actually compare the two profiles and to compare the two for levels. It's very difficult, as you rightly say, with two designs going on, neither of which has been built yet. Unless you actually have a visualized diagram, it's going to be quite hard to judge. And we haven't got that comparison to see how the two will relate one to the other.
Thank you, Chairman.
I suppose, well, what I would really like to say is what's going on in my head, and possibly in other people's as well, which is, I just think this building is hideous. I think it's a precursor of and forerunner of a whole row of similar houses. Is this what you want to see along that part of the cliff? For my money, I think it's just a horrible departure from the pleasant styles that we looked at across the road. I think it's not sustainable. I think it is just an eyesore. I feel desperately sorry for those who are cramped next door and having to look at hugely high walls. I just can't see anything pleasant about this. This smacks to me of greed, and it looks to me like every house that we see along there is bigger, better, shinier, more glassy, more whatever. And where is this nonsense going to stop? People just buy an old traditional pleasant house that's along that and improve it. So-called improve it. It's not improving it. It's hideous.
Councillor Brocek.
Thank you, Chairman. I think a lot of us perhaps will be thinking the same thing, but what I wanted to say was that I think this is an example of the worst aspect of human behaviour. When we are trying to balance applicants' wishes, we have to balance it in terms of the greater good and, of course, our policies. And the problem with this one is we're hoisting our own petard because we've given permission already for concrete. And I know the chairman keeps a list of our wishes in terms of climate emergency, because at the moment we cannot actually implement many of the things we'd like to implement. But the amount of concrete in this application makes it one of the worst applications in terms of carbon production. And we should not be approving things like this after COP26. We shouldn't be approving things like this. But the problem is now that we have got examples along that row, and it's such a pity we haven't held the line with a design for this whole street. And I think we've lost the battle because you've already given permission. But in terms of we have got low carbon future, SRM1 there. But this is an example of going totally the wrong way, totally.
I just want to say I understand your concerns. We are, however, we are with the development plan and with policies and with what's in the area, and we are limited by that. I mean, things in terms of sustainable development and sustainability will start moving. So it's a challenge, possible, but we have a plan in front of us. We seek guidance from planning considerations. So on balance, and given that dwellings, we can't reasonably
Yeah, I would have to say, I mean, I think, you know, we all have thoughts about the designs along that area and ones that exist that have been renovated. I think because approval has been given next door in a not similar sort of fashion, we may struggle to choose an appeal for all of those reasons. I think we accept that there is an issue that we don't understand the height differences. I think there is some opportunity to defer if you wanted to look at relative heights of two plans together. But I think they're your choices really. You either defer to look at the heights which are a concern, get some better feeling for overlooking, or you proceed with a recommendation otherwise. So I leave it to you.
Chairman,
Yes, Councillor Barnes.
can I best opinion on whether deferral might not be an answer at the moment? Because I think there are certain aspects that we would like to check on further by another site.
Upsides are that you'll see what you want to see. What are the downsides?
Well, there is a potential appeal. I think still for non-determination, that is an option. I think going again, how much more information can we get? It's not already in the public domain to look at. There was the option of returning to the site on the day itself. So it, ultimately, if it's sufficient importance that this is a refusal matter, the impact on the amenity of the joint players, then I would say there's deferral. If, however, it is,
So if you want to test the water on deferral, you may have to make a motion for deferral. I think that's the way you test the water.
Yes, let me explain my reasons for deferral test. This is treated as non-determination. I believe the impact on the neighbours needs to be assessed by looking at the two designs in relation one to another. I believe the compatibility of those designs needs to be looked at in terms of the overall impact on the character of South Cliff. And I think because we were unable to gain access, particularly to the rear of the property, that actually we do need to investigate further before reaching the decision. I do this without prejudice to the decision reached. I move deferral.
Yep. I think that we have we have a proposal and a second of deferral. I think the reason is to understand the height differences between the property that was approved and this, and any impact on the amenity which has been raised. I think if you go for deferral and it's decided, there is the risk of non-determination. One can only hope that the applicant is happy that their design is match that, and also I think there has to be an acceptance by the committee that if the heights are compatible, that overcomes that issue, and that there isn't a sort of a dominance.
Sorry. I mean, I don't know, you're saying it's insufficient, but you do see on the top there, between the three, there's, all right, it's 53 and it's 57 with 55, the subject site in between. Gives you some idea of the heights. So you've got the outline of the existing as well, which is in red. You might yeah, and it very slightly seems to slope down if you're looking at it from the highest building, joining properties to the lowest, is in a step there, both front and rear.
I'm not clear, Chairman, what a site visit would reveal that doesn't reveal.
I disagree. Does everyone ask any questions on those heights? Does anyone want to take a moment to consider those relative heights and ask any questions on them? Councillor Madeley.
Yes, can I ask for clarification? If you say that this could be, if it was deferred or refused, it could be not, oh, sorry, if it was deferred, it could be non-determination. But if the owner isn't there when we ask them to be there, and therefore we're delayed in actually seeing over the property or on land, why should non-determination come into it?
Well, to be fair, he was asked to be there at 11 o'clock and we arrived at about 9:30. So there was just this misunderstanding of times. You won't see anything more in terms of the heights because the heights don't exist at the moment of the other properties. The bulk of the other property that we've approved doesn't exist at the moment. So you can see it there, decide that that's enough, or you could try and have the architects, excuse me, Councillor Stevens, are you with us? Or you could ask for planners to show the two designs next to each other, perhaps. You've got all those choices, but you can see the heights. If you're interested in the heights are there. There is more than just height because obviously you've got pitch roofs versus block, but I think the one that we approved was a fairly box-like design as well, as I recall. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, in answer to Councillor Ganley, it's not simply to obtain a site visit, although I do think obtaining access to the rear of the property is important because that's where the danger of overlooking is. But it's also because I think, because there are two totally new designs sitting alongside one another, in an area of some significance because of the seaward views, that the report probably, this is a lesson learned, I'm not criticising the officer, because in a sense, the onus is on us to ask for this. But I do think actually design now becoming an increasing feature of planning and is going to be emphasised by the government and evolved much further, that some degree of comparison with the surrounding houses probably does need to be incorporated.
Councillor Norton.
I think we would be very negligent as a planning committee if we didn't insist on getting into the back garden, which I think is the only place that is going to give us the kind of overview we need of the impingement on neighbours' property and neighbours' views. And also, I think we may get a better view of the swimming pool if we went into the back garden. But not to have been into the back garden and making a decision seems to me reprehensible, frankly.
Councillor Mear, and then we'll take a vote on that deferral motion.
Just ask Mr. Boyce if you could put up an image of the rear of the existing, at the seaward side. At the seaward side. The question was, I presume that there are upper story windows in the property, which would overlook the other garden.
What we have there is the existing elevations, and the ones on the left are front and rear. So they've got dormer windows. It's a chalet bungalow.
So the gardens would appear to be overlooked.
Well, one that was approved by the committee for overlooks this one. Same logic.
And the existing one here, the existing chalet bungalow here, already overlooked.
There is some, and it is conceded in as you'd expect in a residence.
Okay, so I'm going to take a vote on deferral because we've had quite a lot of discussion on it. Councillor Brian Dress.
Sorry, I did have my hand up. Only
Apologies.
halfway. It was just going to echo Councillor Norton to some extent because I thought more than the height of the building was being. There was a discussion about the levels, resulting levels, and compared to next door. It wasn't just the height.
Okay, so we have a proposal for deferral. We need to test that one. Julie, can you do that? Those for a deferral, please raise their hands. Those against deferral? Actually, Councillor Gandy, you can't vote. So this is deferred, and the purpose of the deferral is to have a site visit with guaranteed access to the back, and also for the officers to provide somebody to provide for us the plans of the approved next door, next to this, next to the other neighbour as well, to see how that all those sit together, keeping in mind that currently there are pitch roofs versus large flat roofs. Okay. Councillor.
Could I ask a question about that? We very rarely get helped by the whole street scene, seeing the whole street scene. And we do need that help in making decisions, seeing the whole street scene. And sometimes, you know, architects leave it out on purpose, but that is helpful to get that.
I mean, yeah, I can understand that, but it is proportionate to the application.
All right, okay, let's move on. The next application is 2020-493-P, and it's the Globe in Rye.
Redeclare, Chair.
Thank you.
Personal interest because of my partner's son.
Thank you. Yes, whenever you're ready.
Very much. This is an application for the change of use of a vacant area of land with erection of a two-storey thatched building comprised of a single garage with a designed studio over. The site comprises of a triangular shaped area of vacant land next to a steep cliff below Rye Hill, that's the A2 state, and alongside Military Road. The site is to the south of the Globe Inn and opposite historic listed buildings. The site is within the Rye Conservation Area, and the area is covered by an Article 4 direction. So the studio will be used by a family member. That's the upper floor. Within the studio, there is a WC on the upper floor. The shower aspect of it was removed in the amended plans. The wall will be clad with white feather-edged weatherboarding. The roof will be covered with natural slate. Windows and doors will be white painted wood. There is a previous planning permission for change of use of vacant land, the erection of a two-storey building, comprising a garage and studio above. This was January 2020 on design grounds. In terms of consultations, the parish council, there's an update. They did send an objection. It wasn't picked up, so I do apologise for that. It was down as a standard objection, so I will look at that. Sussex Highways have no objections, as they didn't have before. The archaeologists from the county have no objections. Rye Conservation Society also had no objections to the development. In terms of third-party representations, there was a petition and there was 47 signatures. The main issues arising are overdevelopment of the restricted sites and the loss of on-street parking spaces, inappropriate building within a conservation area, two-storey appears to be a house in all but name, loss of on-street parking in massively congested area, and the entrance and exit points of potential danger to other road users. There were similar issues raised with the 47 representations as well. They noted similar to the previous review scheme, which I have outlined before. Should be single story, and there's also a potential issue with cliff instability as well. The issues here are the principle of development, the impact of the setting on listed building, the effects and character on the character appearance of the conservation area and the street scene, and finally the impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties. The site is within the development boundary, so the principle is accepted. Whilst the site sits within the right conservation area and has a potential impact on the setting of heritage assets, a sensitive design can be supported, and the amended scheme it is felt addresses the council's previous concerns regarding proportions and impact on heritage assets. Appearance takes reference and character from other buildings within the locality that is referred to within the heritage statement that are submitted in support of this application. As such, a proposed building is felt to now address the street which any successful and appropriate design must do, and relates better to the existing buildings in the street. Therefore, the process is considered to comply with Section 6 and the listed Conservation Areas Act by preserving a setting of nearby listed buildings. It is noted that the Rye Conservation Society now do not object to the scheme. The design of the building is no longer contrived and would not erode the character of this part of the conservation area. The building is now of interest and fills a role of place setting and street scene enhancement, and it's considered that it preserves the character and appearance of the conservation area. There is concern from local residents regarding loss of parking spaces and the safety of the development on a busy road and because of the proximity to the junction. However, the County Highway Authorities has no major concerns regarding the development and has no objections as per the previous scheme and advise appropriate highway conditions. So the main issue was design. Just to recap, current submission is to overcome those objections, and it is therefore recommended that plan permission should be granted. If you look at the conditions that are to be imposed, they include removal of permitted development rights, standard time planning conditions, requirement preoccupation to implement the new access as approved, and implement the visibility displays as approved in the plans, and preoccupation to have parking areas to be in compliant. There's a standard condition to stop works if any contamination, land contamination that is, and pre-commencement conditions regarding details of foul and surface water drainage details to be submitted before commencement development and approval in accordance with the said approved details. Finally, preoccupation electric charging scheme to be submitted to the local authority for approval. Just to give another update, the sill in this case is exempt because it's under 100 square meters of development. So that's what I would say, just to clarify that particular point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miles. We have two speakers just for the applicant. One is the applicant, David Hawkins, and Alan Dickinson, the agent. I don't know which order you want to speak in. Or David Hawkins. So if you could come forward. Yeah, so if you understand, you just push the button for the microphone. You can have 5 minutes, as you heard before.
Thank you and good morning. To briefly describe the history of the site, a 4-story building stood on the site until the late 1960s, when it was demolished following compulsory purchase, I guess, by the highways who wanted to extend Rye Hill. That was dropped, in fact, in 2017, and the site was offered for auction. I bought it because the home in which I live in Landgate is accessed by a very narrow passage. There's absolutely no hope of charging a small overnight charging of a small electric vehicle or anything of that sort. And at the same time, my wife's garden design activities and a sort of fairly large reference library require hopefully a well-lit space for that activity. There was never any question in my mind of making a second residence. My requirements for the site are very simple. Excuse me. When I acquired the site at the Clive Bempson auction, I distributed a letter to the people facing the site, saying, I'm sorry, there's going to be a little bit of disturbance while I have the site fenced in, because it was an adventure playground waiting to attract misadventure from children I saw entering, and somebody was going to fall off something and do damage to themselves. And as a consequence of that, that letter to the people in the on the other side of Military Road, a petition or the template for a petition of objection was taken up by somebody who lives further away from Military Road than I do, but it nevertheless listed every conceivable reason that the development could be objected to. Some of the grounds were credible. Loss of parking, although a subsequent parking study confirmed that we would be taking the length of less than one vehicle from the roadway, and we'd be providing off-street parking for 3 vehicles. So that was something of a red herring. I was described in the document that circulated as being a greedy property speculator looking to make a profit and move on. Not the case. Also offensive. And in fact, when the second planning application went in, following the refusal of the first planning application, allegations were made that improper dealings had taken place between the seller and myself, and that, of course, is nonsensical. It's hard to see how that can be implied when the land was bought at public auction. So when we made the first planning application, Mr. Dickinson made the first planning application. A gentleman called Kevin Deeprose was the planning officer here, and he advised us to withdraw the planning application and consult with him, because it was likely to be refused. So naturally we did that, but unfortunately Mr. Deeprose was obliged to retire on grounds of health, and we were never able to have that meeting with him, or indeed his successor, because I think when his successor took the place, his desk may have been cleared, and ours was stamped refused. Our application was peremptorily refused. We've made changes to the design with the help of the conservation officer, and we remain prepared to do anything within reason that people might feel would improve the design. But I'm sure East Sussex County Council sold the site in good faith. They didn't sell it for amenity use only, which is nonsensical, because I don't think anybody would have bought it. I don't think any private individual would have bought it had it had that condition attached. I'm sure they sold it in good faith. I bought it in good faith, and I'm very keen to improve the appearance of the place with something that's neat and tidy and sympathetic to the area, because it's for the last 40 years been in benign neglect, and it's a dumping ground for the hedge trimmings of people in Military Road, facing bottles, dog poo bags, and things like that. I am somewhat embarrassed by the way it presents.
Your time has run to an end, but I think we fully understand what you're saying, and so what I'll do is I'll ask the committee if you have any questions of you. Could you have to turn your...
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
David Hawkins.
You have to turn your microphones on and off, unfortunately.
Just to clarify, maybe it's misunderstood. Is it a residence or is it a business? Because you talked about your wife and yourself having more space to garden.
It's a bit annoying, but you have to turn your microphone on and off.
Sorry, yeah. My wife and I live in a house off Landgate. It's a 2-bedroom house. We're not overburdened with space. My wife would like to have her own working space within a loft above the garage. The loft area is for that purpose. And there's no question of either a sort of full-time commercial business being carried on from there, or indeed of it ever in my lifetime becoming a house. It's a design studio rather than a studio apartment or something like that.
Yes, was somebody else? Yes, Councillor Barnes.
I think I want to try to understand why you applied for a change of use to residential rather than to office.
I think we'll wait. Well, we can, if you hold that question for Mr. Dickinson, he'll probably be able to give you a far better answer to that. Okay, yeah. Yes, Councillor Prodi.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very useful. Just a concern a bit. You have to leave access at the back for the county council to access the wall at the back. There's a very interesting arch.
Could you just, sorry to interrupt you.
I'm sorry. That was described as an important archaeological remain. It's a Victorian coal cellar. It was the archaeological people have established that there is no archaeological value in anything that remains there.
Any further questions? Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. And now we'll hear from the agent, Mr. Dickinson, if you could. Start whenever you feel wish.
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to speak to the committee. David has outlined the background to the application, and I would like to say a few words on the design process. Turning to the questions that have been raised, I initially made the application as domestic, allied to David's house in Landgate, but officers said it needed to be a full planning application because the distance between the dwelling and the site. The archaeological feature, the buildings dated from the mid-19th century, and they had a small storage recess dug into the cliff with an opening over. The first thing I wanted to clarify was some of the details in the officer's report. The officer has just confirmed that the reference to a shower room in the written report is incorrect. The provision is a WC only. But one or two other issues. The site area shown in the written presentation to you is too large. It in fact doesn't extend right the way to the Rye Hill frontage, nor to the steps at the south. It's just the area that the county council presumably regarded as surplus and offered for sale. And the weatherboarding is in fact black, and the doors and windows are a combination of black and white. It's appreciated that with all the various changes, it is confusing. And these details were submitted in amended form in July this year. Following clearance of the scrub on the site by the county council and its sale by public auction, the starting point for the design was the location of this previously built up brownfield site within the Rye development framework, and also the background of approval for a new pair of semi-detached houses nearby on this side of Military Road, just to the north of the Globe Public House, and also in the Rye Conservation Area. In that case, the agent's discussion with officers included whether the style should match the weatherboarded globe or the brick and rendered terraced housing on the other side of the road. And ultimately, a design referencing the weatherboarded style was approved on appeal, The appeal considered the principle and the issues centred on scale and on the continuing tree background. Regarding this application site, a negotiation with the Highway Authority, including a speed camera survey in Military Road, resulted in officer support for the access and parking proposed. The initial design, which was not supported by the conservation officer, it provided the building sitting slightly away from the existing retaining walls on the site to not disturb them. And it provided for the parking and manoeuvring and the garage space and studio. Because of the sensitivity within the conservation area, I carried out a levelled survey of the road and presented from the outset a context street view showing the scale of the proposal in relation to the existing globe and the previously approved constructed pair of semi-detached houses. Following this initial application, there was detailed further discussion with the conservation officer, including site meetings, the submission, and a walk around looking at other examples, and a request for three-dimensional images. The design was supported based on adding interest at the street elevation, including a pedestrian door, workshop-style windows, contrasting black weatherboarding, retention of sandstone present in the retaining walls as a plinth. The overall effect is based on local vernacular, blackboarded warehouses and workshops.
I ask you to back up now.
It is now submitted to you that the design achieves a suitable appearance in this location, and the scheme is commended for your approval. Thank you.
Very quick wrap up. Thank you. I must have asked you this at the right moment. Thank you very much. Just before we go on, I know that you're not in the county council now, Councillor Barnes, but do you feel there's any need to bear any interest in your previous role?
I do, because of course the ownership of the site can change. So the change of use is permanent. I would like to explore why you went for residential rather than not.
The question to you from me was, did you feel you needed to declare interest because you were a county councillor at the time of that sale?
Sorry.
Do you feel you need to declare an interest because you were a county councillor at the time of the sale? All right, that's all right. That's just to be very clear. I think it's important to be clear. All right, no, that's fine. Absolutely fine. Just double checking. And now, if you do, yeah, I think it's good. Put your microphone on too.
For the sake of transparency, although I don't think I have any interest whatsoever.
All right, no, that's good. That's
I was a
fine.
county councillor.
If you'd like to ask a question of Mr. Dickinson, microphone on. You please ask your question, Mr. Dickinson. Now we've just established that.
I think you're aware of my question. Why did you go for residential, not office?
The proposal was to be residential because essentially it is a garage and a design studio over. The garage element was proposed as part of the curtilage of the house in Langate that the client owns. And the officer said that was not acceptable and not correct because of the distance between the two. It was not adjacent. And so it was a full planning application for the creation of a domestic garage and a design studio over. And my understanding is that it's very much a low-key use part-time. I haven't actually discussed with David whether design work is carried out on a commercial basis, but the proposal is as a design studio, so you're invited to approve it as a commercial use. The applicant's use will be low key. So the main point is it has no domestic use. It is purely purposes of design, and as such it's provided with tea making facility and the WC.
Councillor.
I'm just looking at the photographs that have been created to give the impression, and it does look like there will still be parking on outside of the property. There's some rail post fencing, but presumably people will still be able to park. Obviously not over the entrance, but there's still parking.
Yes,
there.
yes, it is quite a heavily used roadside parking, and the proposal seeks to remove one of those spaces, but does create parking within the building and a space outside in the site. So the net gain is a space, and my client parks in Military Road sometimes, or has done. So his car is now accommodated off the road, leaving an additional space.
Councillor Ganley.
Move approval, Chairman.
Thank you for that. We probably want to wait till others may wish to have a discussion or point, but your proposal is on the table, and we probably want to hear from the I'll come to you, Councillor Harbour, the ward members first, and I'm aware that we're moving up to about 5 minutes away from 11 o'clock as well. So I think we'll probably hear from the ward members and then adjourn at that point for discussion or seconding after that, if that's okay. But I'm just going to ask the ward members if they'd like to speak, and then when they've finished, we'll adjourn, which will take us up to 5 to 11. Councillor Stevens or Norton? Councillor Stevens?
Yes, this is a small piece of land that has had 47 objections, and Rye Town Council have also objected, which has now been confirmed by the officer. This land was sold at auction for amenity, and I know the client said that nobody would be interested, but I'm sure the Globe would have been interested as a pub garden or parking. The back wall is in very bad condition and is crumbling away with a busy A road above it. And the entrance at the junction to Military Road is very dangerous and a very tricky one. So that is a really bad junction. Military Road is a busy road to Appledore, and parking has increased with CPE, as seen on Tuesday by the committee. This application was refused last year in January 2020. I actually don't see much has changed on this application, other than it is now down as a house, which was stated on page 22, which worries me with all the Airbnbs coming up in Rye, which is a big problem. Next, the client said that there used to be a building there. Yes, there did. But if you look at the photo of that, there was a horse and cart in it. So, you know, it's a much busier road now. It's not horse and carts anymore. One last point. There was a speaker today to reject this planning application, but the man was threatened.
Councillor Stevens, I think I have to ask you.
Well, it's a
no, it's not appropriate. It's not a plan.
others.
That is not a planning matter.
Okay, well, I just wanted the committee to know it.
It's not a planning matter.
So I hope the committee make the right decision with overdevelopment and the dangerous road. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Norton, did you also wish to speak?
I don't feel as strongly about this as Jeanette, I must say. But I think that if this application had come before us a year ago, I would have been distinctly lukewarm, because a year ago, Military Road was an attractive thoroughfare. You had the Globe on one side, which is an attractive building, you had trees in the distance, and you had very nice early 19th century terraces on the other side of the road. All that has gone now. The street scene, and that was invoked as an argument against it. The street scene has been totally blighted by bumper to bumper parking. That is a result of what's happened with civil enforcement in Rye. You can't find a parking space there anymore. And so in the past, I would have been opposed to a modern building. I think it would spoil the roadscape. But now I think the roadscape is irrevocably lost, and I can't see it being redeemed. So
thank you very much, Councillor. I'm aware we're at that sort of point where we could either start the discussion or adjourn just a little bit early. So I'm going to suggest we adjourn a little bit early, give you an opportunity to do whatever you want to do, and we will recommence at 20 past. For members, there is in the members' room, and as I said, you can either go to the front steps of the town hall or remain here at 11 o'clock, up to you. Bradshaw.
Just a reminder, previous experience, it's not really a good idea to talk to any of the applicants or speaking.
Thank you for reminding us of that, yes. And actually, I wouldn't suggest we speak amongst ourselves at all, just keep the discussion for the committee room. On that basis, I'm going to adjourn the meeting until 20 past. Thank you very much. Councillor Langlands.
Thank you, Chair. I know I seem to have a little bit of a fetish about walls today, but the wall, the retaining wall, I just have a little bit of concern that there's nothing in the report that suggests, or in our conditions, that suggests we need to do a little bit of land stability there if you're going to construct at the bottom of the wall, bearing in mind that the wall doesn't look particularly substantial and we have a main road above it. So I was just wondering whether that might be something we could build into our conditions, just to make sure that if and when this does happen, we don't have a problem with it undermining the wall or the land going up towards the A road.
Just in response to that, I think it was looked at in the officer's report that no issues have been raised. It was regularly inspected by the county, as it was the highway there, right adjoining it. In terms of the non-objection of the Conservation Society, I mean, I prefer a single story, but preference is not an objection. That wasn't an objection. It may have been qualified comments, but I would say it's neutral objection. So just that's my view. To clarify that point.
Councillor Mayor.
Question for you, Mr. Joyce. There's some concerns expressed that this might be used for Airbnb or residential in the future. Would there be a right to use it as such under permitted development or under no?
To answer, no, there won't be. You see quite clearly what it is. It's not residential. It would be a change of use. That would be a material change of use.
The application also takes away its permitted development rights. The key here, just to remind everyone, is that this was refused previously on design, and it's been updated with design elements which have been agreed with the conservation officer. And so I think it's important just to keep that in mind, that the conservation officer has obviously gone through this with a fine-tooth comb.
Just to add to what you've said is that if Rye Conservation Society are not objecting, I think we should take that seriously. And the applicants have made something like 11 adjustments to design based on advice in terms of quite substantial changes to the original. And those have been agreed. So I agree with you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Stevens, did you want to sort of, nobody else wants to comment, sort of finish off, and then we have a proposal, but we don't have a second as it yet, so we'll just wait and see what happens there.
Well, I just think that it's all very well these conditions, but the trouble is it's the enforcement after. And if they do run it as an Airbnb, which is a worry of mine, living in Rye, as I've seen it on numerous occasions, you know, they're not followed up. And where they've made changes as well, I still think it's a two-storey building, and yeah, there is minor changes, but it's still not really in with the street scene, in my view. Thank you.
Well, I can only repeat what I can say. Whether or not enforcement action may or may not happen is not a matter for consideration. But and if it is reported to the enforcement team, and if it's proportionate, on the other front, the conditions there's significant limiting conditions. There's highways related conditions with regards to visibility, place parking, and access. And on balance, together, as the chairman said, it is on design issues at the objection, it's not on the other issues. I take your point.
So we have a seconder for approval, and on that basis, I think we'll take a vote. So all those in favour of approval, please raise your hand. Okay. All those against approval, we have 2. Anyone abstaining? We don't even have a category for you. No, not your non-voter. You did move it. Thank you for that. You clarify the issue. You can move even if you can't vote. Thank you. So, Councillor, Miles, will you take us through this?
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the direction of a new single detached dwelling and detached garage and associated works at Curlew Cottage, Pet Level Road, Pet Level, Pet Fairlight. If you look at the site location plan, it is at the end of this access road. It's a small area of variety of houses. It's on the cliff end area, Pet Level. Comprises a substantial part of the garden of Curlew Cottage. The red line plan, which is where the development is proposed to take place. This, we have some elevational plans as well, but perhaps go to the site plan first. Curlew Cottage is to be retained, as you can see on the plan there, mostly reduced garden area. 50s style chalet bungalow, bone effect concrete blocks and shiplap board and external wall. And the site benefits from some mature natural stream. The site is surrounded by the high wheeled area of outstanding natural Dungeness, Romney Marsh and Rye Bay Special Protection Area and Ramshall site. The Hastings Cliffs to Pet Beach and Dungeness, Romney Marsh and Rye Bay site of special scientific. The new house will have a floor space of 218 square metres, story dwelling. Garden room, large balcony and detached double garage. Driveway would be extended to serve the new dwelling. There's no relevant site history, but there is a recent appeal decision for a refusal against a similar kind of application, but it was for 2 detached houses, and that was dismissed on appeal in 2020. And that was at Warren Cottages, which is a nearby area. In terms of the consultees, Natural England has no objections. There's 8 letters of objection and 9 of support. Just to say, important point is that Pet Level does not have a defined settlement boundary within the adopted DSA. It was taken out of that. There was previously a settlement boundary, but it was for reasons of sustainability, location, found that it was no longer justified. And for the purposes of planning policy, the site therefore lies within the countryside. Proposed development therefore must be assessed on that basis. Development boundaries recently considered and formally adopted by the council count a number of factors. And to look at the Warren Roger bill, the inspector there, I will quote, and he says in paragraph 9, pet level is a settlement with a limited range of services, not identified as a rural service centre or a local service village. Distant and future residents will need to travel to Hastings or Rye to access the facilities that they need. Though there is a bus stop within walking distance of the site, services from it are limited. Pet Level Road is an unlit rural road with no footways that is subject to the national speed. It is used as an alternative to the A259 for trips between High and Hastings Rye. Walking along it for any distance is potentially dangerous. All of these factors mean that future residents are likely to find that the most practical and convenient travel is a private car. It says, for all these reasons, I conclude that the hillside is not a suitable location for a residential development. And I would say then there is a policy objection because of the above issues. Development in the countryside is contrary now to policies RA2, RA3, or strategy, which protect the countryside from inappropriate development. Taking into account the above, the size and height of the dwelling proposed does not reinforce or maintain Officers Field and natural and built landscape characteristics of the area, results in a congruous development which is overdevelopment of the site, and is overbearing upon the Gurley Cottage itself, therefore adversely affecting the countryside character of the area. Concerns are obviously raised to the stability of the nearby cliff. The applicants have provided a geographical report which addresses many of the. There are no apparent issues of immediacy and impact on neighbours. The Highway Authority has not raised any issues with the proposed access. So, just to say that the reasons for refusal are principally on principle, that it's not in a defined area, it's in the countryside, and therefore it cannot be supported in terms of planning policy on principle. But secondly, that the attached garage, a two-story dwelling due to height and scale would be visually intrusive, representing an incongruous addition to the site which is out of character and detracts from the countryside location. Accordingly, the application is recommended.
All right, thank you. We have Dean Rampling, who's the applicant here. Invite you forward to speak, and I could thank you for the other day when you gave us shelter from the rain as well. We very much appreciated that. Thank you. So if you put your microphone on, and 5 minutes, and then if there are questions, we ask. Thank you.
Good morning. As the committee knows, we have repeatedly sought guidance from Rother District Planning regarding the development of Curlew Cottage, and that's via pre-application advice and via planning department personnel and via our case officers. We're aware that we're providing the committee with a challenging and exceptional circumstances to consider. And whilst we understand that in terms of just pure policy, our application is prevented from being viewed favourably, we certainly hope that a more human view can be taken on our values as custodians of this very precious place. We most definitely do not wish to be the case referenced in future as an excuse for further development in the countryside or our community. However, the situation we find ourselves in today significantly falls down to Rother. The staff followed procedure. If they'd followed procedure and handled our multiple inquiries appropriately, our application would have been submitted before the boundary was lifted. And this is the unique element to our case. But no one else can lay claim to this in the future, any future applications. And I genuinely believe it should be considered as an exceptional element into improving our application. We understand that the principle of the creation of another dwelling needs to be considered on its merits. And in terms of social and environmental gain, we believe our proposed plans as a whole and in the long term much to offer. Rather than conflicting with policy EN1, we have avoided visual impact on the landscape with a tree screen, and that will be well preserved, and it will be developed further through native planting and through hedge laying and gap filling. And notably, Natural England, as you say, stated that it considers the proposed development will not have a significant adverse impact on statutorily protected sites or landscapes. We also believe that the proposal does not conflict with policy EN3. It enhances the character of the landscape, echoing many of the examples which can be seen all around in the surrounding area. They do not detract from the rural character. They actually reinforce it. And to claim that it conflicts with EN3 and OSS4 is a subjective opinion of someone who has not visited our site. It doesn't appear to be familiar with the area or much detail of our application. Our design is deliberately low-key. It is the same height as the existing cottage that many of you saw. And if Curlew was a story and a half rather than a single story, it would only be 15% larger. And we have always stated that we were willing to compromise on the house size. But contrary to what the report says, our officer has made no effort to contact us to discuss it. Access was cited as an issue, but we disagree. Our daughters have used the bus for work and college for years, and it stops at the bottom of our drive, our lane. And every hour it takes you to local services, including trains to London in 15 minutes in either direction. Also, now working from home is a very much a viable option. Our application also serves a social purpose to ensure our community remains healthy and viable for the next generation. And it enables us to, as a local family, continue to live and volunteer and work within our community. Parish Council specifically mentioned wanting to support any local family wishing to stay in Pett Level. The case officer has said that we'd make a minimal contribution to our housing supply, but surely even one is worthwhile when we're so far behind. He also recommended refusal because it's contrary to OSS3 and T3, but that site has great low carbon and renewable energy potential. It's perfect for solar and it's perfect for wind power. Also making effective use of previously developed land, as we've evidenced. Additionally, we've used natural and sustainable materials in our design, which is in oak weatherboard. Currently, to build a home that meets our long-term needs, as we would have to destroy Curlew, is surely unsustainable when there's a housing crisis, and it would provide a home. So why put Curlew Cottage into landfill? Coastal communities are being eroded by holiday lets and second homes, and that is what's making communities like ours unsustainable. I hope the committee can see that by granting this application, it will enable families such as ours to keep their community thriving. We're meeting a housing need for our young. We're meeting self-building plot requirements for ourselves, and we're meeting all of the local housing needs objectives. It's sustainable. The NPPF explains that in the event of local authorities struggling to meet its 5-year housing land supply requirement, each application should be considered on its merits. We'd dearly like you to consider these merits and the exceptional circumstances of our highly nuanced case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions? Yes, Councillor Barnes.
Yes, thank you very much for that, and thank you for your letter. I'd just like to ask why it is that you can't just redevelop what you have already.
When we originally looked into securing Curlew Cottage, for a range of reasons, but we thought actually once we'd actually secured it, that it would be a perfect opportunity to keep the little cottage for our daughters in the future. And that is because we have significant concerns about what is happening in our own community. Our daughters are not going to be able to return as adults if they want to settle down into their own community. And it seemed at the time like a brilliant answer. Build something for ourselves and keep that little cottage. In terms of extending and building it, it's made of something called cinder brick. It's not a fantastic house to extend and build upon, basically. It's fine as a first-time home, but it wouldn't lend itself. We did look into making more of it, but it would not be cost-effective, and I don't think it would be a good, easy house to actually convert. The other aspect to it is that inside the house it is completely labyrinthine. It's a lot of those are supporting walls. It would be an awful lot of work to try and convert inside, and it would still be a difficult house for our relatives who are in wheelchairs to negotiate. They've not been able to visit. But the answer to the question, really, we wanted it for our daughters in the future.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes.
What you have as a design already is quite a large quite a large building. I mean, it appears that's how
It appears, yes. Can you mind bringing it up again?
What I don't understand the need to have your daughters make a case for having a separate building for your daughters, given that you're going to build this large house. Why can't your daughters live in the same house?
When we originally embarked upon this, we thought that Curly Cottage would be a perfect house for first-time families if they want to settle down. They're only in their early 20s now, and that was that. We thought that would lend itself to that. Having them move in with us would not necessarily be the ideal circumstances. And when we designed this house, so to give you perspective, the sitting room is 4 meters by 4 meters. I think it looks bigger because it's got balconies around it. We've definitely said that we're happy to reduce it in whatever way anybody feels is necessary. It also looks bigger because it's got a sort of a pod on the end in length. And I did talk to our first planning officer about that because it's for a downstairs bedroom for our disabled relatives. It's an office most of the time because Mike works from home, and I work from home as well when I'm not in school. But it could also, because we want it for we want to be taken out in a coffin. So that would be an ideal downstairs bedroom for us when we get. So, but it looks long, and we did definitely decide to talk to the first planning officer about how we could easily reduce the length. The height is not so easy to reduce, but the height we don't consider with the house. It's the same as existing. That answer. Sorry, I can't remember the original question now.
Can I, sorry, I pressed the right one, yes. Can I just extend Mary's line of inquiry a little bit? One of the objectors says that you own already 3 of the 6 properties in the lane, large allotment, and they go on to say, which is a little bit controversial, the needs of the applicant can easily be met by one of these. I think that is an argument which does weigh with me, but I'm not sure that you've given me a very satisfactory answer in reply to Mary's point.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, I will answer that question. But in the report, we did have a letter that actually counteracted any issues that were brought up by the neighbours. It didn't go into the report, and I feel that wasn't very well balanced. I'd like to make that point. We own, there are 5 houses in that lane, and we originally bought, back in 2009, a house that we built ourselves at Sinclair Cottage. And that house, if this application goes through, we've mortgaged that house, the hilt, so that we can secure Curly Cottage. If this application goes through and we can move there, then we would sell Sinclair in order to do this build. So Sinclair would have to
go. Yes, Councillor Prochak.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to ask you a bit about the public transport, because that was one of the things the inspector brought up, that very little public transport, but there is a bus stop at the end of the lane. Could you tell me about how often it runs and that kind of thing?
Yes, it's the 101 bus, and it stops. Basically, my daughters have used it for many years, and it's because it's a rural route. You basically flag the bus down, and it pulls in at the bottom of our drive. So, which, as anybody, your own bus did that, didn't it? I wasn't there, but I believe that's what happened. So, and the 101 goes every hour. And so you can take it. It's 2 stops up the road. It's a co-op. 1 stop up the road. It's 2 stops up the road. It's the farm. And then, of course, you've got Hastings.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Mayor.
Could I just clarify a couple of things? First of all, the site where Curly Cottage stands is not within the AONB. Is that right? Well, Mr. Joyce will confirm that.
The site is not within the AONB. Our garden has never been designated as an AONB. It's just been previously developed land as run as kennels, run as a cattery at some point, had outbuildings on it, but it was only when we bought it, it was had been run as kennels, and it was just outbuildings and fencing and part of the garden. But it's not an AONB, and it's not with designated just a garden. It was previously developed.
And how does the proposed dwelling compare with the size of the neighbouring properties, Tongs and Martlets?
Well, we had a topographical survey done. I apologise because, although I've got it here, our architect didn't think it was necessary to actually upload it. But I can say that on the design and access statement, you can get the measurements that you need. Basically, we are looking at 7.5 metres in height. And just to give you perspective, Curlew, so we're talking from the datum point on the topographical survey, Curlew measures plus 75.876. So if I compare that now to Martlets, which is also on the topographical survey, their datum point, which is plus 75.614. So Curlew, 75.876. Martlets, which is the lowest ridge of their house, not their highest ridge, there are two ridges. Martlets comes in at 75.614. And then Tongs itself is plus 77.054 in comparison to Curlew, 75.876. Actually gobbledygook to me, but apparently that means something to a gentleman like yourself.
Thank you very much. If there are no other questions, I'll say thank you very much for that. Really useful hearing about all those points. Thank you. I will ask Councillor Meir to speak as a ward member. But I think it's really important to make a point. It's made within the report. This is not to draw you in any direction, but just to remind you, and you probably will remember, a couple of years ago, the Warren's Cottage, which we as a committee refused, and it was actually put forward for approval at the time because it was still within the boundary, and then when it went to appeal was outside the boundary. So decisions by the inspector are made, if I'm wrong please, on the policies on the day, as opposed to what might have happened when something went in for an application. It may not seem fair, but that is the fact of life. We don't, it's beyond our control. That is what happens. But I think it's an important point to make. So, you can, it's, well, have you got the, sort of nearly see it when you see the, it's, when you see the bottom of the lane, you don't see where you come in. You remember what the direction we drove was to the top of the page. It's literally just at the top of the page and around the corner a bit, yeah? It was a little difficult to see exactly. You can't see all the row of houses there. You can see the first couple of houses, about 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 more blocks along there. But it's in the group. It's in that group there.
Yeah, Chair. Warren Cottage will be somewhere in that top right-hand corner, which is marked blank there, but there are in fact properties.
Would you like to?
Chair, I have found this a most extraordinarily difficult application. I feel very internally conflicted on it, heart and head and policy, fairness and justice, all pulling in different directions. And I have to admit to losing sleep over this. It's a development outside the development boundary, therefore deemed to be in the countryside, though perhaps, as you see, not literally, not an isolated house. In ordinary circumstances, I would have no hesitation whatsoever in agreeing with the officers. Our policy would mean, if applied directly, that the application should be rejected. I accept that. Now, are there any ways in which we should look at this differently from an ordinary case. First point is that written advice was given in 2016 detailing how such a house could be built. That was when there was a development boundary. I know that has changed, but the applicants were engaging with officers certainly from 2016. Furthermore, when the policy was changing, before the DASA came in, around the time that the DASA was coming in, the applicant or the architect was in communication with Rother because they had heard that there was going to be a change which would prejudice this application or potential application. And there was, the applicant would say, that there was an assurance given that the change in policy would not prejudice this particular case. Now, I would say that almost certainly the architect was advised by Rother that the application could proceed despite the change of policy. Now, it is very unfortunate that Rother has no written record of any of this. Rother, I would submit, is not in a position to deny or to confirm because there has been a failure to answer emails and a failure to put things into writing. Now, of course, this is no reflection on present officers. We know the difficulty. We move on. But such advice could well have been given. When Sam Batchelor was development manager back earlier this year, I asked him what had happened, what the position was. And he said to me via Teams in the chat, in writing, notwithstanding the lack of any record of further discussions, the intended removal of Pett Level's development boundary was being mentioned by officers, as I remember seeing it in reports, and advice was being given nearer the time of the DASA adoption. That said, we were being pragmatic about any proposals on hand at the time, as we were managing the transition from one policy to another. It could be similar advice was given to Ms. Rampling or her agent if an application was thought to be imminent. And so I think it is perhaps very likely that such an assurance was given, but not seeing it in writing, misunderstandings occur. Now, I think from what Sam Batchelor said was that this discretionary waiver of the new policy would have applied to a new application brought in very soon after December 2019, within a couple of months. Now, it may be that that was never communicated. We shall never know exactly, but it's certainly the applicants have acted to their prejudice in not getting the application in as quickly as they might have done, and we might not be here now. Chair, you've referred to the appeal decision in Warren Cottage. In that case, we turned that down on design grounds. It was a regimented design, inappropriate in the backland area. Those were our grounds for turning it down. At the time, there was the development boundary. Now, I accept the inspector was able to rely on the removal of the development boundary, and that is a matter that the applicant will need to address. You might also have referred to the case at Westfield, where there was an application just outside the development boundary, which this committee allowed. Though I personally voted against it, I saw no justification, but this committee passed that. So in that case, I voted against, and it is different because in that case, there was no prejudice to the applicant. It's always been outside the development boundary. So I think my own thoughts are perhaps consistent. In their training that we received recently on licensing, we were told clearly that policies are guidelines, not tramlines. These are policies. We can use discretion and sense in applying them. We can be apply them in a fair way if the broader objectives of planning policy can be met. If we consider the merits of this particular application, we find no objection from Natural England on landscape grounds, no impingement on the amenity of marklets or tongs, because the new house would be set to one side of them. I can see no objection on that ground. It appears to be a very high quality design using high quality materials, and it's not in the area of outstanding natural beauty. Now, the neighbours justifiably fear that this would set a precedent. Now, and this is a question for Mr. Joyce, if this were, and it's a big if this were to be allowed by this committee, could the D notice specifically state that we had regard to the circumstances of this application being affected by the change in the policy and the assurances which would probably almost certainly given? That would distinguish, that would prevent this being used as any sort of precedent in other cases.
Yeah, it's surrounded by the AONB, firstly. The second point is, yes, the price. There was a defined settlement then. When this was going through, however, I don't know about these conversations, but I do say that once it was adopted, then that would take effect. And even if the principle had been accepted with an earlier submitted application, it may still have been refuted on other grounds. That could have been appealed, but by that stage, then that adoption may well have taken place anyway, and that would have been relevant to the decision. So I think this idea of engagement, lack of engagement, time to put in the application, it's slightly, it's not what it appears, because appeals can be lodged for any number of reasons, refusal can be given. Firstly, I would say that this is something which is quite clearly beyond, there's no settlement boundary here. We have the appeal decision for Warren Cottage. It is unacceptable in principle. There is another reason for refusal. That's more a matter of judgment. And I think in terms of exceptions, there is provision in the MPPF for this, but it's not under those grounds. It's not outstanding architectural design or innovative or architectural design. So, fortunately, I think in terms of from a principal point of view, can't support it. And whereas certainly there's sympathy that there was an earlier pre-app when there was a different policy in place, we are now at a stage where it's not the case. And the principal objection is that it's appropriate development in the countryside. That has to be exceptional. It doesn't meet that test. We can't condition it to say, taking into account everything. That wouldn't be a condition. At best, it could be an informative, a paragraph 38 type informative. I don't think we can condition it to be personal either, because of the size of the development. It's not ancillary to it. And I think it's, for me, you know, there are other opportunities to have residential development on the wider site, which could be ancillary to the main house.
Coming back to the original question, the original question, I wasn't proposing that anything should be conditioned, but I was proposing that any D notice made it clear the basis of the decision took into account the likely advice which was given to these applicants, which would make this not a precedent for anything in the future.
Well, I think probably just clarify the issue of precedent. It's a case-by-case basis. Precedent can have an impact, a material impact, but it's a case-by-case basis. That's what it's on. So any kind of information information regarding the decision made would be informative.
Just on that comment.
Yeah, thank
Sorry,
you.
Andrew, I think we've said quite a lot, so we have to move on with the discussion.
Just sort of to tidy up a couple of the things that in terms of not uncommon that emerging policy is a considered planning application. As and when have an emerging local plan, those policies that can then be considered as maybe not as material but informatives, definitely in terms of planning application. And applicants would be encouraged to review those forthcoming policies as part of their current applications. As a developer, that's what we do. When the development side, that was the current DASA was and I'd just like to challenge some of the language used. Very unlikely that planners would have given assurances. They may have given advice as to the policy, but it would be unlikely that assurances, as you stated, would have been given that if you bring this forward, it would be likely to be accepted. It would be an advice-based objective assessment of the policy rather than necessarily the assurances.
Good. Yes, Councillor Ganley.
Firstly, I'd like to say that I fully support Councillor Mears' approach. I think he's absolutely justified in looking towards a discretionary waiver. Mr. Hook has just said that applicants would be advised to look at impending new legislation, but that's the whole point. Actually, this applicant was never advised, I'd rather, to look at the new emerging legislation. That's one of the major points that was raised. They were not contacted. They spent hours, days, months trying to contact planning. And as we know, it's been very difficult. We all know the reasons. We understand the reasons. The fact remains that they are quite right in saying that they were unable to get anybody to answer the question. I was shocked to receive a letter that I think every member here has received. I've never, in 16 years as councillor, come across such a shocking, misleading, plain wrong treatment accorded to a planning applicant. And the DM did say that he would respond to this, so I'd like to go through it one by one, the points raised one by one with the DM. In order to,
can I just, Councillor Ganley, can I bear just that this is a letter received when?
This was a letter received a few days ago.
What day?
Would you like to see it?
I tend to ignore things after the period that they can't be the application. As you know,
I understand it was before the deadline.
Was it related to the
several days ago?
Yeah, I think
actually you have a copy. You both have a copy. I sent it to you.
Yeah.
Was it submitted through the normal planning process, or was it sent direct?
It was sent to members.
It was sent direct to members,
and I sent it to PM and the head of
if you can sort of make your way through relatively quickly, because I think.
Yes, I'd just like to
the first point
the council, if I can, is this related to planning matters, or is this related to the matter of assessing the planning application?
To planning matters, the way the application was handled.
But that's a different matter. If it's a planning matter, then it's about aspects of planning, about the way the planning application was handled, then that's a matter.
With respect, I disagree.
Well, with respect, I disagree.
Okay, well, we'll agree to disagree.
Well, I would advise the chair of the States to not allow the reading of this letter.
The first point on the list is states that the site plan is inaccurate and gives the impression the lane runs immediately outside our neighbour's front door. The neighbouring house is actually set back over 25 metres from the lane. How this plan even came into existence is a mystery. Would you agree that the site plan is inaccurate? That was not the one that was submitted. It's a new one.
This is part of the drawing for public access, part of the application. This PowerPoint presentation was taken
principle is understood where the house is going to be.
Right.
You know, I think that's important to understand.
So perhaps I should rephrase it and say, would you agree that the house is, the lane does not run immediately outside the neighbours?
Well, okay, no, please, you can't. Look, Councillor, I know where you're going. I do understand what you're saying, and we all receive these sort of lengthy emails criticising the process and this and the other things, and that is part of the purpose of allowing, you know, an applicant to come and speak to if there are these sort of issues. But the fact is that we're looking at just a focus on you're looking at an application for a house on a block of land which is outside a development boundary, and it is a policy issue you're looking at. There is an issue that there was discussions about the house before the change in the boundaries. It isn't actually up to the planning officer to do that, to say, oh, you know, you better get it in quick or something like that. Applicants have agents, and agents are meant to be aware of those things. They should be aware of them. They're the ones giving the advice to the applicant. Now, they may have sent many emails in, but in the strictest sense, the planning officer is not there as a sort of a sounding board for absolutely everything that comes and goes. I mean, you know, you don't get a lot of money for an application if you think the time spent. And that's why there has to be a sort of a process. And I think that's important here. So I think we have to just stick to the core element here. You see a house, there have been applications approved for single houses outside development boundaries. There's no question. I think I've got about 7 of them, and I can't understand why any of them have been approved, even the one in Westfield, this committee. Now, in my personal view, and I differ from the committee, that was a bad decision. I think it was because it effectively extended a settlement boundary by default, and that's not the intention of development boundaries. The intention of development boundary is to retain the housing in a certain area. I've seen other ones, at least 2 in Saddlescombe, 1 in Catsfield that was approved, and there was no real, and none of them made a lot of sense really, but you know, they went through the system for whatever reason, and many others that haven't been approved. So you just have to make your decision on the policy aspects. That if you think there is a reason for approval, then you'll vote that way. But I think don't pick holes in, you know, he did, he should, he did, she said, all that sort of thing. It doesn't take us anywhere. Yeah, let's just try and deal with the application for a house on a site where it is that you've all seen, not all of you, because on this application there will be several people who can't vote because they didn't actually come to the site. And you need to determine whether you are happy to follow the policy and in fact follow the decisions you made before, which was supported by the inspectorate, or approve it for whatever reason you might choose to approve it. And I think that's just, it's a really binary sort of decision process there. So I think let's take it forward on that basis. Councillor Barnes.
So I haven't finished.
You wanted to?
No, I was listening. Yes, I take that into account, but there are issues I would like clarified. One of which, the question of visiting the site. Was a site visit made by the planning officer? I have here in this letter a statement saying blah, blah, incongruous development which does not reinforce and maintain the natural built landscape. As the planning officer did not visit the site, we must query the foundations of this judgment, quite rightly, if nobody visited the site. Am I correct? Is this statement correct?
My understanding was the officer he was looking at all of those up-to-date historical areas. And the officer does not live locally, unfortunately. So this is a life.
Yeah, I understand.
So we may have to get staff in, consultants in from all over the country.
Yeah, but I have to say that I feel that we should not make a computer says judgment. Computer may well say no, but I think we should take into account what you've all read in this letter And as Councillor Mears suggests, a discretionary waiver is in order to approve this application. Thank you.
I think it might help me a little. I'm getting slightly confused. I gather the development boundary was not changed, but removed the entire settlement?
Removed, yeah. It was just after the visit to Warren's cottage, which you may, I don't think you were on about.
Genuinely, Chairman, find this slightly incomprehensible, and I have to say, I hope we're going to address it in the local plan. This is a substantial number of houses. We seem to have got into our heads that somehow a substantial settlement away from local shops is unsustainable. We all know, of course, that the technology has now actually meant that we're all beset by white vans day in, day out. The whole concept of unsustainability, particularly now we're moving to electric cars and hydrogen, is again something which seems to be peculiarly dated. I have to say, it seems to me that the decision that was taken was looking very much to a distant past rather than to an imminent future. Beyond that, I am worried that policy shifts, where we seem to have been responsible for the delay in the application, actually has prejudiced the applicant. I want to uphold policy, but I have to say, I think in this case, we are going to do a gross injustice to do so.
Just to point out a point of clarity there, I believe that this was actually post the adoption of the DASA. Therefore, the policy was active at the time at which the application was submitted. It may have been advised previous to that, the point at which the application was submitted after the adoption of DASA, and therefore talking about were live, active policy.
Can I shift the focus slightly for a few moments? I think all of us who went on the site visit on Tuesday would agree that it was an extremely attractive location. And sadly, the rain came down at the wrong moment, we didn't have a chance to enjoy it, but it is a delectable spot, beautiful rolling countryside. And it is interesting that this development is wrapped around on three sides by an area of outstanding natural beauty. It has on the other side a delightful piece of coastline, which is almost totally undeveloped. And I'm afraid I just do not want to see another large house on this site. I think it is too precious.
What else would like to do? Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you. When I read the report, like the Westfield case, when I read the report, I thought this is open and closed. We shouldn't have a new house in the countryside. Very, very clear. But then on the site visit, I was quite shocked that it was quite a hamlet, not an isolated place, really. There's quite a number of houses there. So that was the first thing that struck me. Then, of course, there was the sustainability with the access to shops and bus and all the rest of it. But the one thing, and I think Councillor Barnes and Councillor Mears described it really well, we know that there have been problems in communication. We know, and this is not the first time I will apologise for that. We are doing it time after time after time over the last 2 years about communication with planning officers. Because what's happened here is that the timing, it's the timing. And Councillor Mears read out the letter in writing from Sam, from our officer. And the word that he used was pragmatic. And so if it was just a case of policy tick box, as we've talked, Councillor Ganley has said, a computer-driven decision, it wouldn't come to this committee. That's what we're for, to actually say, well, on balance, is this what we should do or not? And I share Councillor Mears' anxiety about it, that the fact is that if it had been a different time, and not that much different, the permission would have been given.
Just to say and reiterate the point I made, that's the issue with the defined settlement. But the thing is, too, there was another reason for refusal. There may have been more reasons for it, depending on the scheme that came forward. Now, if there had been an appeal lodged on those reasons accepted, time taken for that appeal determined well over that. It would have been a much earlier time, and the up-to-date policy would apply to that. So I think it's a bit of a red herring, not to officers and delays, and it seems that has been. It is not. It is to say that if someone exercises the right of appeal, gets other reasons for being, and in this case, there's another reason for it. There would be a delay in waiting for that determination of like several months or even more than a year.
I think that's not the point I was making. It's not the point I was making. I was thinking about using our judgment as a committee. That's the point I was making. And I just remind you, Westfield. I actually shared, I didn't vote for Westfield, the committee did.
So does anyone have any other comments or questions, or does anyone, yes, Councillor Barnes, move forward?
There's just one aspect that we haven't addressed. That is that there have been various mentions of the crumbly nature of the cliff. And also, I think in the geophysical survey, which was commissioned by the applicant, the answer to the sustainable nature of the cliff was very much a matter of some doubt. And this is getting closer to the cliff edge. I personally would be very worried about it. And I think it's one that hasn't been discussed. I mean, we've been obviously quite rightly concerned about the rest of the application. I don't think we've actually talked about the physical nature of the plan. I take it, I know that the house is kit form. I've read the report. I've read, the actual whole case was as fascinating as the plot of a novel. But I just have this overwhelming feeling myself that it is dangerous to allow, as Councillor Norton said, something that is so in such a beautiful spot should be a danger to.
Thank you.
Well, could I just cover something which Councillor Mary Barnes has said?
If you could do that and wrap up. And
I certainly will. On the subject of the cliff stability, I'm not putting myself forward as an expert on cliff stability, but I have looked at the shoreline management plan, which shows that this, where Curlew Cottage is standing, would probably have 100 years or so before natural processes would erode the cliff. So I would suggest that, subject to proper conditions, any permission, if it were granted, that should not be something which would deter us today. It does need to be got right before any.
Does anyone want to put forward a proposal for either supporting the recommendation or, sorry, we don't have another one. Generally, I don't take more after the wrap up from the ward member. Is it a new point that you want to raise? Proposal, all right, thank you. So you're proposing approval. Is there anyone wanting to second that?
I will second.
Councillor Mears has seconded. Correct. So there are a number of people who can't vote, including Councillor Ganley, who's proposed it. He can propose it, he can't vote. Councillor Mary Barnes, Councillor Jeanette Stevens, and Councillor Curtis. They're quiet in the corner. That's a good point. Councillor Ganley, would you like to articulate the reasons for approval? The planning reasons for approval. It has to, do have to be clear because that could be. We do have to do it by the book.
I believe that the treatment that this applicant has received justifies, and the fact that the
that is not a planning reason. You do have.
Well, this is the first time in about 10 years that I've been asked to give a planning reason for an approval. Well, I don't have one.
Well, that first there are that there are no significant objections, planning objections to the development itself, leaving to one side this development boundary. I'm proposing that the committee should see this as an acceptable development which doesn't affect.
This would be a sustainable development, probably because of the transport link.
Attractive in keeping with its surroundings, not impinging unduly on neighbouring properties, and that we should apply the policy pragmatically and with a sense of justice.
You're making quite a precedent-based sort of statement there. We should apply settlement boundary policies pragmatically. That's quite a dangerous statement. I'm just pointing these things out to you because I think it's really important. That's not making a unique case for this.
No. I'm also saying that this is wholly exceptional circumstances based on the justice of this particular case.
Sustainable development.
Can I say something?
Let the development manager speak.
Can I say something, please? I just want to remind all members of the committee of regard must be had to the development plan unless material planning considerations indicate otherwise. So if you're minded to overturn those other material, that must outweigh planning policy, not justice, actual justice. So
just very quickly, Councillor Barnes, very quickly.
Yes, it's a genuine question. Although this is right on the edge of the AONB, it's not in the AONB. For tilted balance applies, can't be disapplied. So there is a presumption in favour of a house unless there are reasons against it.
No, there's presumption in favour of sustainable development, which is the point that I just made a few minutes ago. You would have to demonstrate or feel that you had demonstrated or felt that the house that it demonstrates sustainable development, correct?
Well, on the sustainable development, this is on a bus route.
Well, if you want to put that forward as the reason, that's fine. That's why I suggested it to you, because I felt that there was that the proposer and seconder were struggling a little bit.
Sorry, I'm trying to be helpful to the proposer of the motion. It seems to me that it is sustainable.
Okay, so you are proposing you're proposing approval, and the reason is that you believe that this is sustainable development, primarily because of the bus route that exists at the end of the lane. Okay, well, you can add that to it.
Could I just add, if it's approved, that we have a condition about dark skies?
Yes. What condition would you like?
I haven't got the words, but that actually no external lighting and that kind of thing.
Condition that there be no external lighting. Yes.
This is a difficulty. If the committee were not to follow the officer's advice, we naturally get into this position that we don't have a list of conditions in front of us to approve. I think we would have to delegate conditions to officers, the boundary treatment is, and so on and so on.
to approve this on the basis it does not impinge on the neighbouring properties, and the committee considers it sustainable development given its access to, regular bus transport to facilities, and that we delegate conditions to officers, one of which must be no exterior lighting, ensure a dark sky is maintained on that location. So that's the proposal at hand. Has everyone, I said anything that anyone disagrees with or doesn't feel like was correct? So if we could take a vote, so this is a vote for Councillor Lang.
Sorry, can I just make a comment about the voting? If I see that you've taken people off of voting.
But they took themselves off by not.
That were on the bus, but there was an access issue there, I think, for them. And I think if we don't consider the fact that some people aren't in a position to actually completely get to the destination, I think we're failing our options.
I think that's worth taking into consideration, but it is a future consideration because it's very clear that if you don't go to the site, and there will be people where there are physical issues in the future, and Councillor Errington had a discussion about this earlier today about perhaps trading back down to a smaller bus again, to be able to do that. And I think fall out from COVID and having to have bigger buses and this sort of. So I'd like to say yes, we can all vote, but I would just be throwing the rules that we put in place into the wind, and I don't think we can do it. Councillor Stevens, very quickly.
I mean, it's not very fair, really. I mean, we did go halfway up that line. I mean, it was all uphill, and I do suffer with asthma.
You know,
he's had a hip. I mean, we were there.
The rules
and
are
we read
the
all the
rules.
paperwork. I mean,
the rules are the rules. You didn't see the sign. I'm sorry.
You should go back to the small Rambler bus then. That can get up
And we've had that discussion. This is a fallout, one of those fallouts from COVID. You know, well, it may not be fair, but they're the rules we all agreed at some earlier time. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. But we're expected to do a flyby on certain applications. Oh yeah, but that's okay. We know what it is.
As long as we have all done the same thing.
Well,
because what you didn't have the benefit of is, as you know, when you go to a site, is the ability to ask the development manager questions or for that person to present whatever at the exact location. That is the difference, because we all have to have the same, if you like, knowledge base or exposure for that to happen. So, I mean, I'm really sorry about it. It's not my choice. That's the rules that we agreed at an earlier time.
I totally understand that, but it has to be, otherwise we get into the realms of a bit of hypocrisy, really. You can't ask a committee to say, oh, that's okay, look, there's nothing to see here, move along, and then deny us the issue of being able to vote when we've actually researched it, looked at it, discussed with the other members, which I assume was what you're supposed to do, to get a balanced view. This is all about a balanced view. I don't believe the planning officer. Did the planning officer go to the?
Yes. Yeah. But you take on board that there are some applications we don't make a site visit, and others where we might just look at it from the outside. Beeching Road is a good example because there's really not much to see, but we are all exposed to precisely the same thing. And I know that's a bit harsh, a bit hard, but that's just the way it is. If you want to change that, then
we can have just a point of clarification. Really,
if we want to change that, then we can have a discussion as to changing that and go through the process to do that. It's not, that doesn't bother me either way in terms of going through the process, because it'll be a decision made by members. I think it's probably a constitutional change. So,
well, it was recently, wasn't it? It's only just been changed.
Yes. That was the head of service.
All right. Well, thank you. Anyway.
Yeah, I know. It's just the way it is. No, you can't. We are voting now, right? The proposal's up, the reasons given, it's been seconded. There's been some objections about that. There's nothing that can be done about it. I'm really sorry. I'd love it if there'd be something to be done about it. If I didn't go up to the site, I would. Yeah, it doesn't count. You've got to go. You've got to be in the presence of the on the site or the development manager where that final briefing is given. Bottom line, that's it. It shouldn't make any difference to the vote, I wouldn't imagine. So can we please take a vote? There is a proposal for approval, and so could I have a show of hands as to who would like to approve this based on what has been said? Yeah, those raise their hands for approval. And those against? And those who are abstaining can vote. Is there anyone? So what was the vote there? That's approved. All right, very good. Let us move on. This is application 2021-1913P. Okay, Mistral, Shepherd's Way, which is a fairly straightforward.
Okay, we ready? Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, erection of a single-story side extension at Mistral Shepherd's Way, Fairlight. You can see from the site location plan that it's a two-story detached dwelling. There it is for a closer look. Single garage with greenhouse side currently unextended. The area is covered by an Article 4 direction. The proposal is 3.2 metres wide by 4.5 metres in length. Excuse me. We okay? Yeah, thank you. Brick and UPVC windows will match the existing house. Fairlight Parish Council have no objections. There's no significant impact in terms of amenity in regards to overlooking, loss of outlook, loss of privacy. Design and materials will match the existing. I can't really say an awful lot more, just to direct you to the plans to show you the existing east and south elevations. Show you the west and north elevations, proposed ground floor plan, ground floor and first floor plans. These are the proposed east and south elevations, west and north elevations, and then the plan where you see the extension there, clearly on the right. Okay. So all I'll say is then that the recommendation is for approval subject to standing conditions regarding time to plans development in accordance with the approved plans, and development should match the external materials. Thank you very much.
Did anyone want to have a discussion or make a proposal? A proposal for approval? Does anyone want to second that? Second that? All right, we've got the proposal for approval and seconding. Can we have a vote? Those in favour of approval? Thank you. I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much. So we have item 12 and 13, which is the planning statistics. Nobody has an objection. I was just going to go to 13 because 13 sort of encompasses the details of what's on 12. Is that all right? Is everyone happy with that?
No, sorry, can I make one small question, please?
You can.
Page 54, it's the planning enforcement. Number of complaints resolved in the first quarter was 95, and then it drops right down in the second quarter. The number of complaints resolved to 44, page 64.
So your question is, what would you like? The question is, you've got complaints received and complaints resolved, yeah? Page 59's got a graph with the numbers on.
Page 54 and page 64. We did stunningly well in the first quarter, and I mean, I think maybe the second quarter stats have come down. It might be been a holiday period or something like that. I just wanted, it's.
But if we look at the second, report, it's the first report as well.
Right. Okay.
Because it's got all the graphs which show all the quarters going back 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 quarters. So.
Yeah, but I'm looking at the numbers for these specific quarters that we managed to do 95 in the first quarter, and then we did 50 less in the second quarter.
That's right, 44.
Yeah.
95 to 44. Okay, but if you pick this up, let's go through item 13 from front to back, and we'll pick that up as we get to enforcement. Is that all right? Okay. So going through the report, and just looking at I think if you look at the graphs, because they spell it out quite clearly, you've got applications received, which have been rising over the quarters. At the end of the second quarter was up to 397. You've got applications determined, which are also showing an uptick in the second quarter, 253 to 292. That's a little bit of effect of the beginning of Capita coming on board. So they're the first two bits of information that are starting to show things forward. Are there any questions for the officers on those particular?
It's very hard to compare gradients. I can't quite make out whether we're losing ground or gaining ground.
Well, I think what we're seeing over the 2 quarters is that this year has been extraordinarily busy, far busier than the preceding 2 years. But you also have seen more applications out the door. In fact, the last quarter of the second quarter, I should say, the most recent quarter, you have the most applications out the door of any of the quarters going back for those 3 years. Unfortunately, it's also the busiest in terms of applications coming in, and it does seem to be that there's a new kind of benchmark when it comes to applications, and it just has to be managed. I think if you go down the list, it will show things like other applications, miscellaneous applications, ones that don't get reported to central government every year. You see it's very high there too. See there's enforcement as well, which was raised by Councillor Aronson. I think what it does show is that ground is gradually continuing to cost up to the end of September. But I think what it's also showing is, as Councillor Brian Hall said, beginning to see the Capita impact on those figures. Seeing it in the miscellaneous report as well. And just to say that very hot off the press for October is that we have seen a reduction. So it does seem that there's been a Capita coming, momentum's built, and also you've got the other officers, our officers who are actually, I think, now being managed to tackle the backlog. And I think looking apocryphally at the older cases, that backlog of older cases actually, well, obviously it's very early days when you're talking about a month here, but I think what he's showing is a continuation and enhancement of Capita and more focused management.
Yeah, I think the issue is that Capita have actually been you're starting to see the impact, and what's not shown on these is the October numbers, where I think there were just under 200 applications, decision notices, which is good, but unfortunately applications have gone up.
No,
in October.
No, October.
Oh, they came back down again.
Yeah.
So when you got to the end of September, undetermined applications were still increasing. Of course, getting more in, even though we're pushing more out. So I have asked Ben Hook to give us a monthly report, just send out, which will track that more closely. So we're not looking at sort of quarter that's gone plus 1 month, which is what we look at here. We'll be looking at the last month, and it'll give everyone more confidence to know exactly the direction of undetermined applications, because at the end of the day, we want to see that line going down, and one way or the other. That's the key thing, because over the period, if you think Capita started in sort of June time, well, anything they took on, they had 2 months really before decision notices, maybe 2 to 3 months. So we weren't going to really see their impact till the September time, and we have seen that impact, and in October, but we're not helped by an increase in applications. But I think what in the next items that you're going to see in item 14 are some relatively straightforward changes that need to be made. Sadly, they have to be constitutional changes, which will additionally help that, and I'll wait for Miles to go through that. Do you want to, is there any questions on these statistics? I think you had one on the enforcement.
Yeah, one thing I can, I mean, I can see, yeah, that there has been a tail off in cases closed. I mean, you know, my first day was 5th of October, so I can only give an idea of why that is. My feeling is that we've been a focus towards more formal action. I think the other thing we've been able to do very recently, can't study in the figures, is to see the overview of the course of caseload and see how we can manage that down, but at the same time be able to more effectively highlight what the so-called hot topics, if you like, for want of a better word, are there for the ones which are going to have a lot of attention, maybe member attention, maybe it's both. So it's about that ongoing management, I think. I hope that you'll see, and I'm sure you will now, fairly more positive terms in terms of caseload and its reduction as we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, just wanted to sort of say, sorry.
No, I just want to say, if we look, 95, the first quarter we cleared 95, that was great.
Could I make a point? Actually, let me just make a point on that.
Moving to more,
So,
what's coming to talk about later, obviously help that figure. I mean, but that seems absolutely fantastic. I mean, not sustainable, but that was whatever we were doing there, we were doing well or differently.
Okay, but keep in mind, if you turn your thing off, keep in mind when you look at those complaints resolved, the previous month was 28, and the current quarter was 44. If you add those three numbers up, you get 158, I think. So over those 3 months, the average was 53. So it's a higher average. The tracking line would be going up, but it wouldn't have that blip. And I do think you always have to be careful. There are timing differences. Something might just trip into one period and not in the other. I can't say that that's happened here, but what you can say is statistically, over those 3 periods, the average was 53 per month, which is higher than any of the previous numbers you could see before. So I think that the key on the enforcement is some changes which are being made through the change in the constitution, and I think it's best that Miles explains that when he goes on to the next point. Any questions on the stats?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of give. I quite like this agenda item because it chance to have a bit of a chat about sort of general performance of the planning team in maybe a less adversarial way as earlier in the meeting. But I suppose what we're looking at here is, in particularly if you look at table 6, item 13, is that the number of applications on hand has grown from 391 to 886 over a period of years. This is not something that's happened overnight. It's been a growth problem, and it will take time to reverse as well. I would like to some reassurance that in the last month, so after these figures have been reported, we've seen the first substantive reduction in applications on hand to the tune of about 100, which is the first time in sort of years, with the exception down in 2019-20 where there was a small change. First time in 3 years where we've seen any reduction in cases. But there is a reversal. It will take time, but the plan that's in place now, and some of these things that we're bringing forward, like the next item, the planning review is a key part to that, improving the way in which we communicate with our customers. But I'm hoping what you'll see in the future is a downward trend rather than an upward trend. Nice to see the first signs of that, more live sort of data. And as Councillor Vinehall said, we'll be sending that out to members on a frequent basis, so you have that sort of live data.
Councillor Langlands. Bye.
Just to go back to the enforcement, it has gone from 507 to 518, so it is creeping up, and that's sort of slightly disconcerting. The number of complaints that are on hand. How many people do we have actually managing the enforcement? I mean, would you say that was
3 and a bit?
3 and a bit.
3 and a bit. Got 2 part-timers, so they just sort of 2 and 2 bits.
That's
It's got about
It's a vast caseload, and we're aware of it. And Miles' experience in enforcement becoming valuable to helping us manage that caseload. And I think there's a lot of outstanding cases there that could probably be dispensed with relevant. So we're looking to sort of clear some of the fog, work out exactly where we are, and then we can ascertain what we need to manage that going forward.
that sorry. I just wanted to say that congratulations to the enforcement officers for their reports. Now they're putting reports in the monthly update, which actually gives a bit of detail about the position they're adopting. That's much appreciated.
Yes, I'm happy to await a review, but I have to say our reputation for enforcement is not particularly great. I think it's not the fault of our officers in capacity problem. And yes, they make very good reports, but sometimes enforcement seems to take an incredibly long time. And sometimes that's of concern because where it's concerning an illegal activity, we may actually be putting ourselves in the wrong terms of law.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry, I mean, fair point. I mean, this is on a completely different matter, really. Hans raises a fair point. I think actually not. It's not a big stick to wheel, but they shouldn't do. The one thing I just want to say, one bright light in terms of performance within the planning team is that over the last 2 months, we've brought the validation process period from 12 weeks down. So, I mean, that has a knock-on effect in that the planning officers have now got 3 months worth of cases to deal with in 4 weeks, but but we'll manage that. But that's the first part of the issue, is clearing the validation backlog, knowing what we've got. So we're now down to 3 weeks, which, by the way, is still not where we aim for. We aim for sort of a week, very maximum, but that's a big shift in the right.
I'll make the point here that one of the issues that has arisen, Ben has taken over and obviously Miles has come on board, is that within the department there appears to have been absolutely no statistical management of what was going on a week-by-week, month-by-month basis. You know, how many do we have on hand, what's happening, and what's the throughput, just to get the basic statistics that you will get, you know, on a monthly basis has been a trial. And the Ocella system is not exactly brilliant for generating that easily. So I think with the new structure, things are starting to happen in terms of getting that together, and that's it. But it's coming up against all sorts of things like constitutional issues which need to be changed. So if there aren't any more questions on the stats, you will be getting a monthly report. That will be older than previous months, so pretty much will be only a week old as opposed to, you know, nearly 4 months old in some cases. So that will hopefully give people confidence to see the direction. Gives a lot of focus, so that when there's focus, things happen. You know, nobody wants to see the chart going up. A little more challenging when you see applications go up, but I think Miles is confident that over this period of the year, they tend to sort of go down a little bit.
Well, I mean, there can be. You can get these trends. At Christmas, it can be a little glut. I mean, they can get towards late winter and the summer tail off. I mean, my point I'm really making is over. The rot has been stopped, and we hope it's been because of an increased backlog. Although there was a huge number of applications, got more out the door, and I think that's a good news story. An overview. That as we go forward, we can sort of, if they're slightly higher than we expected, it's going to take a little longer. Peso's a little lower, then it might be that progress is a bit quicker. But we're in a place now where I think we can anticipate what the outcomes will be within reason of a slightly higher or lower anticipated slope coming.
Right. Yes, please.
I mean, all good news, really good news. And we do staff surveys. We've done a second one fairly recently, though we haven't got the results of it. I just wondered about the morale of the that's measured and supported and all the rest of it.
Well, so far it seems to be quite positive. I think with the situations like this, it's been going on for some time, and it's about how do you manage this towards a minimum disruption? How do you manage this and take as many people forward with you? I think it's crucial we keep them within the process, being part of the process as much as possible, rather than say we're making from top down, if you like. So I think, the morale, I'm sure they're going to be quite tired, they're going to be pressed, busy. But I think with CAPSA coming on board, that's shown there is a process there and a resource that can help. I think also in terms of how we're looking at things, flying off and looking at some of the changes about to look at, might make it easy to get the managerial. Something that I notice is certain managerial responsibilities, silos, and we need to open it up a bit so everyone's more aware of stepping out. And I think that whole idea of perhaps the young staff, how are they mentored, how are they managed? All right, they're helpful, the older staff, but we need something a little more formal. Structures. That is
good. Do we need to take a vote to resolve the motion? No. All right, those two reports are noted unless there are questions, because I think it leads on to the item 14, which is proposed revisions to the scheme of delegation. I'll leave it for you to go through these.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Actually, the first one here, it's relatively simple. All it really proposes is we remove the requirement of principal officers, senior officers to be MRTPI, or in other words, chartered town planners. I think the reason for this is that in local government, there tends to be a lower proportion of people who are chartered town planners. We have two principal officers, one is and one isn't. So if they've got the opportunity, and indeed I'd argue have a responsibility to do some of the sign off of decisions, then I think that will help share the load, as I was talking about just now, between management to get those decisions out the door. So that's the first part of it. Okay. Now the second one relates to enforcement, and essentially here I just simplified it really to say that we do things in consultation with legal services, having first consulted with the solicitor or the council, rather than have things go through them, which is how as it is now. The reason for this is that we still have their input, but when yourselves and customers out there want action or want investigations, want updates, we can give them timescale, but if it's the delay, the legal end, then we break our promises. I think what I'm trying to do here is make it easier for us. We can prepare the notices, reports. Legal can say, it looks good to me, or we suggest changes here and there. And we know when they're going to go out the door. And I think especially talking about enforcement being a slow process, sometimes you do need that urgent action. And it may be just easier to be able to do that as well. And have some things in place for doing that cost benefit analysis if we're going to do stop notices, temporary stop notices, like that.
So in essence, the officers make the decision, not the solicitor. And at the moment, that's a big backlog, as we know, legal services is a backlog. And rather than having 20 things on waiting at the solicitors, we can actually make that, or the officers can make that decision. Yeah, they will take advice from the solicitors but they're not going to be stopped from progressing something. I think that is a major improvement. Councillor Ganley, you want to...
I think that both proposals are excellent, and I move approval.
Yes, on the two that we've talked about so far, totally agree. Getting the investigation underway and consulting legal at the same time seems to me perfectly sensible in terms of establishing facts. One that is buried away in the first paragraph of Appendix A, though, did worry me slightly about not dealing with anonymous allegations. I think there is a difference between what I would call neighbour sniping, very small things, but I have experience of a major anonymous allegation at the moment, where in fact there has been intimidation of the person reporting, which is why they're saying at the moment they will waive anonymity later on, but they feel at the moment that anonymity is saving them from harassment from the person. So I think we need probably some consultation with the local member or some bit of scale in there, because minor ones I've no problem with, but major enforcement ones, I can see reasons why people sometimes want to hold their name back at the beginning.
Just on that point first, I think that all complaints are anonymous unless people are prepared to come forward in the public domain. I mean, that's why I would say, I mean, anonymous is people who won't give any details because we then have a problem with updating them. And that's a very practical reason. Things like significant breaches often don't stay anonymous for long. And I think one thing we are looking at, and I've drafted, is an enforcement plan. And I think in that we could, if we're updating the enforcement plan, it does need updating, is that we could say that anonymous complaints won't be investigated, but they be done via the parish council or a ward member. In that case, then they can stay in the shadows while you get the updates. So on the second point with legal, the consultation with legal won't be for all cases, just very clear. It's only cases where we're going to issue an enforcement notice. Then, when we've drafted it, then it goes to legal for their approval. Make that point.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, we all receive complaints about things, and my own personal approach is if somebody wants to make a complaint, they should make a complaint. You know, there is a habit of people trying to offload it onto the ward member, get somebody else to do it. If it's a minor one, then I'll just say go back and it's for you to make the complaint. Parish council will often say to me, "Here's a problem. Would you report it?" I'll say to them, "No, you report it. It's your issue." And as a parish council, they can do it as a body. That's not identified as a person. And I think that's really useful. It keeps it more anonymous in that sense.
I think the procedure is clear, but very awkward when somebody turns up on their doorstep with a shotgun.
But they are anonymous, in the reporting of it anyway. So that you can't, unless somebody has actually said I did it, or that there's no evidence of who reported something. That's the whole point of it.
That's why I'm suggesting solving the local member, but I'm perfectly happy, knowing this now, to take the complaint on myself.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have known of it if it hadn't actually been drawn to my attention by somebody other than the complainant.
On the enforcement plan, I think having an updated enforcement plan is going to be very useful for all of us, because it just shows you what we do, what we can do, what we can't do, what the ethos of it is. The fact that it's supposed to be transparent, accountable, measurable as well, so there's facts. But it's also about the two things. And one is, how do you make a caseload manageable? Also, be aware, caseload awareness, what are the hot topics? They're going to change with time. I mean, it's important to know that cases can change. What's the priority level? That's an initial investigation, how it appears in terms of seriousness. Of course, that may change over time. So we're trying to look at that and get to timescales. And in the system already, there is a review after a certain amount of time. If a case is going nowhere, we can actually say, well, we can decide whether to take action or not. So I'm hopeful, and I'm happy to share with members a draft of this, as soon as possible. obviously comments will be welcome to actually say that we set out our stall and that members are clear, customers are clear. It's on the website, and hopefully is the first thing people go to when they're looking to make an informed.
So one other thing I think might help, Miles, and I hope this wouldn't take very much, is it's a simple point-by-point explanation of the process, where it starts, what happens at each point, and what the timescales are generally, because I'm sure we all experience this, where somebody says, why can't you just stop this today? Or why hasn't the notice been issued? And there's a whole lot of legal procedural steps that have to be gone through. And at every point, there's a way for a badly behaved person to sort of temporarily get around it, even to the point where it's taken a long time to say get to an enforcement notice, and then they appeal the enforcement notice. And that then just adds, and that appeal could end up a year. And it's incredibly, I mean, you know, the one that I have at the moment, incredibly frustrating when you explain this to a resident. They get angry with you because you're not sort of doing anything. So if we can actually give them something and say, these are the timescales, they are the legal timescales. We have to follow this process.
Well,
it might help us.
I think the thing is, like most enforcement plans, it will be front loaded. So you go out in a certain amount of time, you make a certain amount of time, you know, to investigate that case. There will be stuff beyond our control, as you absolutely say, and hopefully what's as much in our control as possible if you invite an application. You know, but there is a judgment call there. If you invite an application, you can't insist on that. Then make a judgment, do you go forward with enforcement action? On the other hand, things like planning appeals, things like prosecutions, enforcement appeals are all beyond our control. Probably important to have that communicated, especially because at that level you tend to get serious people. People's frustrations are going to be understandable, but also they can be third parties. So they can make representations. That's part of that process as well. To some extent, there is limited options for that too. So, but they'd have to waive their anonymity.
We have a sort of have a flow chart.
I think a flow chart
of some kind.
Yeah.
Something that would help us say, look, this is the timescale
you can, and I think you just have to be a little bit careful with making it overly complex. So you want the main things on it. Yeah. And yeah, do I can do.
But for example, you send at some point you send out a survey. I can't remember what it's called.
PCN. Planning confidential.
And that requires a person to fill it in and to send it back, and there's 28 days there. Everyone has everything has a number of days.
Yeah,
which they may not do, and then there's another.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between what's discretionary and what is a function, and I think we just need to not have something that's overly complex. Keep it as simple and as essential as possible as a flow chart. Because the text within the report, mostly in the appendices, the enforcement tool, tell you.
It's about managing expectation.
Managing expectation, but it's also about not using people with too much spaghetti. You know,
yep, agreed.
Visually,
so I think Councillor Ganley proposes. Would anyone like to second this? Second by Councillor Project. Are we all in this? We'll have to go through the full council because it's a constitutional change. So we just hopefully everyone will follow this through. Can we have a show of hands supporting this? Everyone. Full council is next one. Is I thought it did. No. Constitutional.
No, they're all. These functions have already been delegated to you and your functional planning committee. So, upon approval, they are instantly adopted as part of the constitution. Thank you very much.
Cool. That's news to me. Thank you for that. That's excellent news. What else can we do? Apart from reversing opposite thing. The second last item is appeals. Did anyone have any questions or comments on the list of appeals? You can see the Fairlight one there. You can see the Nordium one there. Two.
I was Chairman.
Oh, yes, good. This is which one were you speaking about? I didn't. No, I must. I hadn't seen that. That's good. This is the traveller site. Travel site. Well, we're pleased that you reported that today. Thank you very much. And which only leaves us just to note the time for the next site visits on the 14th of December. And if it makes you feel any better, Councillor Curtis, we got very wet. Thank you. This meeting ends at 1:10.